Tonight we're exploring what really happened before Harry Potter was born. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Long before a young boy with a lightning bolt scar ever stepped onto platform 9 3/4, the world he was destined to save was already ancient, weary, and steeped in a history that stretched back through the mists of antiquity. We often think of the wizarding world through the lens of Harry's journey, seeing the stone walls of Hogwarts and the bustling shops of Diagon Alley as backdrops to his specific struggle against Voldemort. But these places were not new when Harry arrived. They were the survivors of 1,000 years of upheaval, secrecy, and civil war. To understand the boy who lived, we must first understand the world that was waiting for him. A world built on the foundations of primordial magic, fractured by blood prejudice, and forced into the shadows by a great separation that changed the course of human history. Imagine a time when magic was not a secret, whispered in the corners of London, or hidden behind a brick wall in a pub. There was an era, lost to the memory of most modern witches and wizards, where the magical and the mundane were intertwined, where the lines between myth and reality were blurred. This was the era of ancient magic, a raw and fundamental force that predates wands, incantations, and organized education. It was a power tied to the very fabric of the earth and the deepest mysteries of the human soul that allows a mother's love to become an impenetrable shield. And it is the same source of power that the earliest sorcerers sought to harness before the first laws of magic were ever written. But where there is light and creation, there is also a shadow that seeks to consume it. In the ancient world, long before the name Voldemort struck terror into the hearts of Britain, there were others who peered into the abyss. We look back to the classical antiquity of Greece to find the architect of the ultimate darkness, Herpo the Fool. He was the first to realize that the soul could be splintered, the first to commit the unspeakable act of creating a Horcrux. His legacy is the dark thread that runs through the centuries, a warning of what happens when the pursuit of immortality overrides the natural order. This ancient evil set the stage for every dark wizard who would follow, establishing a precedent for the soul-shattering magic that would one day define the greatest conflict of the 20th century. As the centuries turned, the need for structure and protection gave rise to the institutions we know today. In the 10th century, 4 of the greatest witches and wizards of their age came together with a vision of a sanctuary, a place where magical children could be nurtured far from the growing distrust of the non-magical world. Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena, a Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin did more than just build a school. They established the cultural and political heart of British magic. Yet even in this moment of unity, the seeds of future discord were sown. The tension between Slytherin's desire for pure-blood exclusivity and the more inclusive visions of his peers created a rift that never truly healed. It is a conflict that echoes through the corridors of Hogwarts to this very day, a reminder that the prejudices Harry faced were not inventions of his time, but ghosts of a 1,000-year-old argument. The world before Harry was also a world of grand families and legendary artifacts. We hear the names Potter, Peverell, and Black and think of them as mere characters in a story, but these are lineages that carried the weight of history. The Potters were not always the chosen family of a prophecy. They were a line of inventors and healers, descending from the 12th century eccentric Linford of Stinchcombe, whose work with potions like Skelly Grow provided the financial and social foundation for the generations that followed. And deeper still we find the Peverells, 3 brothers whose brush with mortality gave birth to the legend of the Deathly Hallows. These objects, the cloak, the stone, and the wand, represent the eternal struggle of the wizarding world, the choice between accepting death as the next great adventure or trying to master it through power and blood. Perhaps the most significant turning point in this Untold era occurred in 1692, with the signing of the International Statute of Secrecy. This was the moment the wizarding world truly went underground. Driven by centuries of persecution, witch hunts, and a growing fear of the Muggle world's sheer numbers, the global magical community made a choice to vanish. This wasn't just a change in law, it was a psychological shift that redefined what it meant to be a wizard. It turned neighbours into strangers and forced magic into hidden enclaves like Diagon Alley, which had already been a hub of magical commerce for hundreds of years. The Ministry of Magic rose from the ashes of the older Wizards' Council to enforce this new secret order, creating the bureaucratic and often rigid society that Harry would eventually inherit. As we move closer to the year 1980, the shadows begin to lengthen. A slow, calculated poisoning of the wizarding world's old wounds. He tapped into the ancient prejudices of Salazar Slytherin, the dark innovations of Herpo the Fool, and the bureaucratic weaknesses of a ministry that had grown complacent in its secrecy. By the time Harry was born, the world was already in the grip of a nightmare. The First Wizarding War was a time of disappearances, broken trust, and a desperation so deep that people looked to prophecy for a glimmer of hope. Tonight, we're going to peel back the layers of this history. We will look at the ancient bloodlines that converge in a small cottage in Godric's Hollow. We will examine the evolution of the institutions that govern magical life, and the ancient magic that governs life itself. We will see how 1,000 years of history were distilled into a single night in October 1981. A night that ended one era and began another. This is the story of the world that existed before the boy who lived, a world of deep magic, old secrets, and the long winding road that led to the dawn of a new legend. But before there were wands, before there were incantations, before any wizard had ever spoken a spell aloud, magic existed, not as a tool to be wielded, not as a curriculum to be mastered, but as a living, breathing force woven into the very fabric of the earth. It stirred in the deep places of the world, in the roots of ancient forests, in the veins of mountains, in the salt-touched edges of the sea. This was the Primordial Undercurrent, the original magic that predated every spellbook, every wand core, every ministry decree. And it is the oldest truth of the wizarding world, a truth that would one day be forgotten, misunderstood, and then rediscovered only in the quietest, most desperate moments. You see, long before Hogwarts ever raised its towers against the Scottish sky, before the first sorting hat was ever stitched, before the word wizard even existed in any language, magic was not something that belonged to anyone. It was not taught, it was not inherited, it simply was. The land itself hummed with power, and those few humans who could sense it did not learn to control it. They learned to listen. They learned to trust. They learned that magic had its own will, its own rules, and its own terrible mercy. This was a world without formal education, without governing body, without the neat categories of transfiguration and charms that we know today. It was raw, it was untamed, and it was dangerous. In that ancient time, there were no boundaries between what we now call light and dark magic. There was only power and the intent behind it. A healer might whisper to the earth and coax a wound to close using the same voice that could, in another breath, blight a field. Magic was not a science. It was a sacred and terrible art, passed down in fragments, guarded by families, practiced in secret circles under moonlit hills. The earliest wizards did not wear robes or carry wands. They marked their skin with ochre. They danced in stone circles. They made offerings to the spirits of the rivers and the woods. They understood that magic was not a tool for convenience, but a covenant with the unseen world. And beneath all of this, older than any human touch, there existed what some would later call the deep magic. This is not the magic of spells or potions. This is the foundational law that governs life and death itself, the force that makes sacrificial protection possible, the ancient contract that binds the universe in ways that no charm can override. The deep magic is not something you learn, it is something that is. It is the reason a mother's love can shield a child from the darkest curse. It is why death itself can be cheated, but only at a price that cannot be bargained. It is the mysterious pulse that runs beneath all wizardry, often sensed but rarely named. Think of it this way. Every spell you have ever heard of, every incantation, every flick of a wand, is like a ripple on the surface of a vast, dark ocean. But the deep magic is the ocean itself. It is the weight of the water, the current that moves unseen, the abyss where light does not reach, and it has always been there. Before the first wand was carved, for the first word of power was spoken aloud, the source from which all magic flows. And it is the place to which all magic returns, when a spell is broken or a life is given. This primordial undercurrent did not vanish when wizards began to organize, when they founded schools and ministries and laws. It simply went underground, buried under layers of civilization and tradition. The early magical societies, the druids, the oracles, the alchemists, knew of it, respected it, feared it. But as time passed, as wands became standard and incantations became formalized, the old knowledge faded. Most wizards came to believe that magic was something you did, not something you were part of. They forgot that they were swimming in an ocean. They thought they were just sailors on a boat. Yet, the deep magic never left. It waited. It waited in the Chamber of Secrets, in the blood of ancient families, in the shadows of Godric's Hollow. It waited for those rare moments when the rules of ordinary magic were not enough, when love and sacrifice and death converged in a way that no spell could replicate. Lily Potter did not cast a spell to save her son. She did not wave a wand. She simply stood between her child and death, and the deep magic recognized her choice. It responded. It honored her sacrifice with a protection that Voldemort, for all his power, could never understand. That is the primordial undercurrent at work, silent, ancient, terrible and beautiful, because the wizarding world did not begin with a sorting ceremony or a Quidditch match. It began in the darkness before memory, in the raw, untamed landscape where magic was not a subject but a pulse, and that pulse has never stopped beating. It beats in every act of true sacrifice. It beats in the strange, inexplicable magic that sometimes defies explanation. It beats beneath the stone floors of Hogwarts, beneath the vaults of Gringotts, beneath the roots of the oldest trees in the Forbidden Forest. And if you listen closely, if you let yourself sink into the quiet of this history, you can almost feel it. That is the deep magic. It is the secret engine of everything you think you know about Harry Potter's world. It is the reason why a simple wooden wand can channel the fury of the stars. It is the reason why a baby can survive the killing curse. It is the reason why, even in the darkest times, there is always a thread of hope that the old powers will rise again. But the primordial undercurrent also has a shadow. For every ancient power that protects, there is another that wounds. And the first wizard to truly fracture that primal force, to tear a piece of his own soul and anchor it to the world, lived long before Hogwarts was even a dream. His name has echoed through the ages, whispered in the same dark tone as the word Horcrux. He was the original architect of a terrible and intimate evil. And in the next chapter, we will step into the world of that ancient Greek wizard, the one who dared to split his soul for the first time, setting a precedent that would echo down millennia and ultimately lead to the greatest terror the wizarding world has ever known. The first fracture, the beginning of the end. It is waiting to be uncovered. From the raw, untamed magic of a world without wands or incantations, we turn to a name that haunts the oldest scrolls of wizarding history, Herpo the Foul, a Greek wizard so ancient that his life is more legend than fact, and yet his legacy is more tangible than almost any other. He is the first known practitioner of what we now call Parseltongue, the language of serpents, and he is the one who first dared to fracture his own soul. In the shadowy antiquity of Greece, long before the Parthenon was built, or the philosophers wrote their treatises, Herpo walked a path that would echo through millennia. He was the first to speak to snakes, to command them to understand their ancient hissing wisdom, but his true ambition lay elsewhere. He sought immortality, and he found a way. The method was murder. The price was his own soul. Herpo the Foul is credited with the creation of the first Horcrux, a dark object that holds a piece of a living soul, torn apart by the ultimate act of violence. He did not stop there. He also bred the first basilisk, the king of serpents, a creature so deadly that even its gaze can kill. Imagine the scene in some forgotten Greek grove, under a moon that has seen countless cycles, where Herpo performed the ritual. He took a chicken egg, incubated beneath a toad, and from that unnatural union hatched a serpent of immense power. The basilisk became his weapon, his guardian, his symbol, but the Horcrux was his true masterpiece. The process of soul-splitting was discovered through trial and terrible error. How many murders did Herpo commit before he perfected the spell? We do not know, but we know that he succeeded. He hid a fragment of his soul inside a vessel, and in doing so, he became the prototype for every dark wizard who would follow. The first fracture set a dark precedent. It taught the world that death could be cheated, but only at the cost of one's humanity. Herpo's Horcrux endured. He himself may have died of old age, but the fragment of his soul survived, whispering its venomous influence through the ages. The idea he planted grew like a curse in the soil of magical history. Centuries later, another wizard would rediscover that same forbidden knowledge. Tom Riddle would read about Herpo the Foul in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, and he would think, if one man could do it, so could I. The first Parselmouth, the first Horcrux, the first Basilisk, all of these arose from the dark legacy of ancient Greece. That legacy did not die with Herpo. It lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to rise again. And rise it did, as the magical world moved out of antiquity and into an era where magic was still open and still visible before the Great Concealment. That is the story we will uncover next. From the shadow of ancient Greece and the dark innovations of Herpo the Foul, the wizarding world did not vanish into legend. It continued, evolving, spreading across the continent and the British Isles. The knowledge of soul magic, of basilisk breeding, of the first fractures in mortal life, these remained locked away, whispered in secret circles. But the everyday practice of magic was far more open. For centuries after Herpo, the boundary between the magical and the non-magical was not a wall. It was a permeable membrane, a shifting line that both sides crossed without much thought. Wizards lived among muggles, and muggles knew of them, though not always with understanding or trust. This was the era of open magic, a long stretch of history where the two worlds coexisted in an uneasy, sometimes productive, sometimes dangerous embrace. In the courts of kings and queens, magical advisors were not hidden curiosities. They were expected, respected, and feared. Merlin himself is the most famous example, serving King Arthur in the 5th or 6th century, but the tradition lasted for hundreds of years after. Wizards who could foresee the outcome of a battle, brew potions that cured the king's mysterious illness, or enchant a rival's weapon to turn to ash. These individuals held immense influence. They were often courted by rulers who believed that magic was a tool of power, a divine gift, or a dangerous edge. But the relationship was fraught. If a harvest failed or a plague struck, the magical advisor could become a scapegoat. The uneasy coexistence meant that wizards walked a tightrope. Useful enough to keep, powerful enough to be dangerous, different enough to be blamed. It is during this era that one of the most important wizarding lineages in British history took root. In the 12th century, a wizard named Linfred of Stinchcombe lived in the village of Stinchcombe, in the county of Gloucestershire. Linfred was not a warrior or a courtier. He was a healer, an inventor, a tinkerer with potions and plants. His magical talents were extraordinary, but he applied them to the practical problems of daily life. He created remedies that could repair broken bones in seconds and concoctions that banished the worst colds and fevers. Two of his most famous inventions survive to this day: Skelly Grow, which regrows bones, and the Pepper Up Potion, which cures the common cold. These were not mere spells. They were medical breakthroughs that changed how wizarding families treated injury and illness. Linfred's reputation grew, and his neighbours, muggle and wizard alike, came to him for help. He was known for his habit of pottering about his garden, tending his magical plants, always busy, always experimenting. Because of this, the locals nicknamed him the Potterer. Over time, that nickname became a surname passed down through generations. And that surname, shortened slightly, became Potter. Linfred of Stinchcombe is the earliest known ancestor of the Potter family, the direct line that would eventually produce Harry James Potter, the boy who lived. But in the 12th century, no one could have foreseen that destiny. The era of open magic was not a golden age of harmony. It was a time of shifting alliances and deep suspicion. Wizards who served in royal courts were often resented by non-magical nobles who saw them as cheats or threats. Witch hunts did not begin suddenly in the early modern period. They grew gradually from a soil of fear. In many parts of Europe and Britain, magical folk were tolerated as long as they were useful. But if a king fell ill or a war was lost, the wizard advisor could be burned at the stake. The uneasy coexistence was precisely that, a tense, pragmatic balance. Some wizards chose to hide their abilities, others wore them openly, and still others founded small, isolated communities where they could practice magic without fear. The seeds of the later statute of secrecy were planted in these centuries of fear and violence, though it would take many more generations before that great separation was enacted. Linfred's work, however, stands as a testament to the constructive side of open magic. His potions were shared widely, crossing the invisible line between wizarding families and the non-magical world. Some of his remedies may have even been adopted by muggle healers, adapted and diluted, until the original magical source was forgotten. In this way, magic enriched the world, even as the world grew more dangerous for those who wielded it. The Potter family, through Linfred, became associated not with dark power or political ambition, but with healing and quiet innovation. That legacy would echo across centuries, down to Lily Potter's sacrifice and the ancient power it unleashed. As the medieval period waned, the open era began to close. The witch hunts of the 14th, 15th and 16th centuries intensified. Magical communities withdrew further. The founding of Hogwarts in the 10th century had already been a reaction against persecution, a place to teach young witches and wizards away from prying eyes. Yet even at Hogwarts, the tensions of open magic lingered. The founders themselves argued over whether to admit Muggle-born students, a debate that would echo into the blood purity wars of later centuries. The world that Linfred knew, where a wizard could potter about his garden and be known openly for his magic, was fading. But before it vanished entirely, another lineage arose, one that would produce the most legendary magical artifacts ever known, the Deathly Hallows. And that story, the tale of the Peverell brothers and their encounter with death itself, is for the next chapter. And so as the centuries of open magic began to fade into the hidden world we know today, the wizarding families who had once walked freely among muggles carried with them stories that grew more mysterious with each retelling. Among the oldest and most haunting of these tales is the one that would eventually become known as the Peverell Mythos. It is a story so deeply woven into the fabric of magical history that it blurs the line between legend and truth. The Peverell brothers, Antioch, Cadmus and Ignotus, lived in a time when magic was still wild and untamed, when wand cores were chosen from the hearts of ancient forests and the boundaries between life and death were less certain. The tale begins with a crossing, a river at dusk, and a figure cloaked in shadow. According to the story passed down through generations, the three brothers reached a treacherous river. Using their magic, they conjured a bridge, defying the natural order, and then, on the far bank, they met Death himself. Death was not pleased. He had expected to claim them in the river, but instead, they had outwitted him. So, pretending to be impressed, he offered each brother a gift of their choosing. Antioch, the eldest, demanded a wand more powerful than any in existence, a wand that would always win its duels, so Death carved the Elder Wand from a branch of an elder tree and gave it to him. Cadmus, the second brother, wanted the power to bring back loved ones from the grave, so Death took a stone from the riverbank and gave him the Resurrection Stone. But Ignotus, the youngest, was wary. He asked for something to hide from Death himself, and Death, reluctantly, gave him his own cloak of invisibility. Now, the question that has haunted scholars for centuries is this: was Death truly the personification of mortality, or was he something else? Some believe the brothers met not Death, but a masterful wizard who crafted artifacts of immense power, perhaps the first wand maker, the first stone carver of souls. The Elder Wand, after all, has a documented history of passing through the hands of dueling masters, always seeking a more powerful owner. The Resurrection Stone, when it appears later in history, is a dangerous and ambiguous object. It does not truly bring back the dead, but rather summons shadows from memory. And the Invisibility Cloak? It is the only one of the three that seems to have no flaw, no hidden cost. It does not fade with time, cannot be summoned by spells, and cloaks its wearer from all forms of magical detection. This suggests that the cloak may have been a natural artifact, not created by Death or any wizard, but something ancient and unique, passed down through the Peverell bloodline. The Peverell family themselves were not kings or conquerors. They were a line of wizards who valued subtlety and cunning. Ignotus, the youngest brother, lived a quiet life. He passed the cloak to his son, who passed it to his son, and for generations it remained hidden within the family. The Peverell name eventually faded into obscurity, but the bloodline continued, merging with other families. And here is where the story becomes deeply personal to the Potter lineage. Through marriages and inheritances, the Peverell blood found its way into the Potter family tree. By the time of Harry Potter's birth, the invisibility cloak had become a Potter heirloom, passed down from father to son, always kept secret, always treasured. It was the same cloak that Ignotus had received at that centuries before. So the Peverell Mythos is not just a fairy tale about death. It is a story about legacy, about the choices that define a family through generations. Antioch sought power and died in a duel. Cadmus sought love and ended his own life when the shadow of his lost love could not embrace him. But Ignotus sought humility, and his line survived. That survival is what connects the brothers to the boy who would later live. And as the wizarding world turned away from open magic and towards secrecy, the cloak remained a quiet thread, weaving through history until it would one day be needed again. But before that thread could be pulled, something else was gathering. 4 powerful wizards, each with their own vision for magical education, were about to come together in a way that would shape the future of Britain for 1,000 years. The gathering of the 4 is a story that begins in a time of fear and ends in a castle built on the edge of a dark lake. And it is that story we will follow next. The legend of the Peverell brothers and the Deathly Hallows lingers in the air like a half-remembered song. But as the centuries rolled on, that song changed. The world grew more crowded, more suspicious. The open magic that once let wizards walk beside kings and queens began to draw shadows instead of light. By the 10th century, the climate in Britain and across much of Europe had turned cold for those who could not hide what they were. It was not a sudden war. It was a slow creep of fear, a tightening of the throat that came when a villager saw a child levitate a stone, or when a harvest withered under a muttered curse. Anti-wizard sentiment rose like a tide, fed by superstition, by religious fervour, by simple jealousy. Muggles had once sought magical help for healing or prophecy. Now they burned the healers and stoned the prophets. The old coexistence grew fragile, then fractured. Wizards found themselves hunted in places where they had once been honoured. Families fled into remote valleys, or hid their magic behind silence and lies. It was in this desperate hour that 4 individuals, each carrying a different piece of the same answer, began to hear whispers of one another. Godric Gryffindor, a warrior of matchless courage, had grown tired of watching gifted children die before they could learn to control their power. Helga Hufflepuff, whose kindness was as deep as the earth, could not bear to see any magical child left abandoned. Rowena Ravenclaw, whose intellect pierced the veil of the unknown, saw that knowledge was being lost to fear, and that one day, without a school, the craft itself would fade. And Salazar Slytherin, ambitious and proud, believed that magic was a birthright that must be protected, not diluted. Each of them knew that hiding was not enough. They needed a place where young witches and wizards could gather, learn, and grow strong. A sanctuary that would stand against the storm. The meeting of these 4 is not recorded in any official parchment. No ministry existed yet to chronicle it, but the stories say they came together in a woodland glade, perhaps near the edge of what would become the Great Lake we now call the Black Lake. They argued, they disagreed. Slytherin wanted purity, Gryffindor wanted bravery, Ravenclaw wanted wisdom, Hufflepuff wanted fairness, and yet, beneath their differences, a single vision united them. A place where magical children could be safe from persecution. Not a fortress, not a prison, but a school. A home for the wandering spark of magic that flickered in the blood of the young. They chose a location in the Scottish Highlands, remote and wild, where the mists could hide their work from prying Muggle eyes. They laid the foundations themselves, stone by stone, using magic that had not been seen since the days of the ancients. And as they built, they poured their own souls into the castle. Gryffindor's courage, Hufflepuff's loyalty, Ravenclaw's wit, Slytherin's cunning. Each one became a thread in the fabric of Hogwarts. But even as the walls rose, tension simmered. Slytherin argued fiercely that only pure-blooded students should be admitted. The others disagreed. The argument did not end that day. It would echo through the centuries, a crack that would never fully heal. Still, for a time, the 4 stood together. They gathered students from every corner of Britain, taking them in regardless of birth or wealth, teaching them to control the wild magic that had so often brought persecution upon their kind. The sanctuary they built was more than a building. It was a promise that the wizarding world would not be extinguished by fear. That promise took shape in stone, in towering turrets, in shifting staircases, in a castle that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The architecture of Hogwarts was not merely functional. It was a reflection of the founders' deepest intentions, a labyrinth of secrets, a fortress of learning, and a home that would one day hold the weight of prophecy. But the story of how those halls were shaped, and the mysteries that still sleep within their walls, awaits in the next chapter. You join us now as the four founders of Hogwarts stand together on a windswept Scottish hillside, looking out over a valley that will soon become the most famous magical location in all of Britain. The year is roughly 990, and the world outside this place is growing darker for those who carry magic in their blood. Muggles have begun to hunt them, to fear them, to burn them at stakes and drown them in rivers. The founders know that if wizarding children are to survive, if the old knowledge is to be preserved, they must build something that will last for generations, something that cannot be torn down by torch-wielding mobs or weathered by the passage of centuries. And so they begin to build Hogwarts. But you must understand that this was no ordinary construction. The castle was not raised by masons and carpenters, hauled stone by stone up a mountain. The four founders combined their deepest knowledge of ancient magic to will the castle into existence, shaping the very bedrock of the land to their vision. Godric Gryffindor contributed his raw courage and his skill with defensive enchantments, ensuring the castle would repel any who approached with hostile intent. Helga Hufflepuff brought her understanding of harmony and sustenance, weaving spells that would make the castle self-sufficient, able to feed and comfort its inhabitants for 1,000 years. Rowena Ravenclaw, the most brilliant of them all, designed the grand architectural logic of the place. The staircases and towers and chambers, arranged in a pattern that would facilitate learning and discovery. And Salazar Slytherin, the master of subtle and secret magic, wove the hidden passages and concealed chambers into the fabric of the castle, knowing that some knowledge must remain hidden until the worthy were ready to find it. The result was not merely a building. The castle itself became a living thing, a sentient structure imbued with a fragment of each founder's intent. You could feel it in the way the walls seemed to breathe, in the way the portraits whispered to one another as you passed, in the way the staircases would shift and rearrange themselves when they sensed you needed to be elsewhere. The magical construction of the castle and its sentient, shifting corridors ensured that no two journeys through Hogwarts were ever exactly the same. A student might find that a door that led to the dungeons on Monday now opened onto a balcony overlooking the Black Lake on Tuesday. A corridor that stretched for 100 feet on Wednesday might shrink to a mere 10 feet on Thursday. As if the castle itself were testing your memory and your resolve, the founders understood something that later generations would forget. Magic is not a force that can be contained by rigid architecture. It is a living, breathing thing, and it requires space to move and grow. So they built Hogwarts to be as fluid as the magic that would be taught within its walls. The Great Hall, for instance, was enchanted to mirror the sky above, its ceiling reflecting the weather outside, the stars, the clouds, the phases of the moon. The chambers shifted according to the needs of the students, sometimes expanding to accommodate a crowd, sometimes shrinking to create an intimate space for quiet study. The very stones of the castle seemed to remember every spell ever cast within them. An old magic lingered in the halls like the scent of rain. But a castle, no matter how magnificent, is only a vessel. The founders knew that the true heart of Hogwarts would be the students who walked its corridors, and they needed a way to ensure that the legacy of their distinct philosophies would endure long after they themselves had passed from the world. And so Godric Gryffindor took his own hat, a simple pointed hat he had worn for years, and poured into it a fragment of each founder's essence. He charmed the hat to think, to judge, to discern the qualities that lay hidden in the hearts of young witches and wizards. The enchantment of the sorting hat to preserve the founders' distinct philosophies, was a stroke of genius that would define Hogwarts for 1,000 years. When you placed that hat upon your head, it would look into your mind and your soul, and it would see which of the 4 virtues burned brightest within you. Did you possess the courage of Gryffindor, the loyalty of Hufflepuff, the wisdom of Ravenclaw, the ambition of Slytherin? The hat would know, and it would assign you to the house where you would grow best, where you would find kindred spirits, where the seeds of your character would be nurtured and strengthened. The hat was not merely a sorting device. It was a living bridge between the founders and every generation that followed, a voice that spoke with the combined wisdom of 4 of the greatest witches and wizards who ever lived. And what were these students to learn once they had been sorted? In those early years, the curriculum was far different from what you would find in the Hogwarts of later centuries. There were no desks and chairs, no chalkboards, no textbooks bound in leather and stamped with gold. The early curriculum that focused on survival and basic elemental control reflected the harsh realities of the world outside the castle walls. Students learned first how to protect themselves from the elements, how to conjure fire from cold stones and water from dry air. They learned how to identify poisonous plants and how to heal the wounds that came from encounters with dangerous creatures. They learned the rudiments of defense, simple shield charms and disarming spells that could mean the difference between life and death in a world that wanted them destroyed. There was no such thing as transfiguration or potions, as you would recognize them in those early days. The founders taught the raw elements first, the fundamental building blocks of all magical practice: earth, air, fire, and water. These were the domains that a young witch or wizard had to master before they could even begin to think about transforming a matchstick into a needle or brewing a simple curing potion. The castle itself was the textbook, the laboratory, the proving ground. Students learned by doing, by failing, by trying again. The shifting corridors and sentient staircases were not just marvels of magical architecture, they were lessons in themselves, teaching the young mind to adapt, to think on its feet, to trust its instincts. And when the students gathered in the Great Hall, at the end of each day, the enchanted ceiling reflecting the stars above, they would listen to the founders speak of the deeper mysteries. Godric would tell tales of heroic deeds, of the knights of old who fought for justice. Helga would remind them of the importance of community, of the bonds that held wizarding families together through centuries of persecution. Rowena would pose riddles and challenges that kept their minds sharp long into the night. And Salazar would speak in low, measured tones about the old bloodlines, about the families who had preserved magic through the darkest ages, about the secrets that could only be passed from parent to child. It was in these early years, as the castle settled into its rhythms, and the first generation of students began to grow, that the first cracks appeared between the founders. The seeds of the Great Schism were already being planted, unseen and unsuspected, in the very stones of Hogwarts. And before long, those cracks would widen into a chasm that would change the wizarding world forever. But that is a story for our next chapter together. The Sorting Hat was enchanted to preserve the founders' distinct philosophies. But that enchantment could not prevent those same philosophies from beginning to pull them apart. For the first few years, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw and Salazar Slytherin worked as a true coalition. They shared the castle's grand vision, each contributing their strengths. Gryffindor's courage in defending the school, Hufflepuff's fairness in accepting all students, Ravenclaw's wisdom in designing the curriculum, and Slytherin's cunning in creating security systems. Yet beneath this unity, a crack was forming. A crack that would eventually split the founders forever. It began with Slytherin's growing unease about the Muggle world. He had seen too much during his travels: witch burnings, mob violence, and the quiet terror of discovery. In the 10th century, persecution was not a distant memory. It was a real and daily threat. Slytherin argued that the only way to protect the magical community was to ensure that the school admitted only those with pure magical lineage. Muggle-borns, he insisted, were a liability. They might be spies for the Muggles. Or at the very least, their lack of magical heritage made them weak links in a chain that could snap under pressure. This was the core of what would become known as the Great Schism. The growing ideological rift between Salazar Slytherin and the other three founders was not about petty jealousy or personal ambition. It was about fear. Slytherin's demand for pure bloodlines as a means of security against Muggle spies was rooted in a genuine sense of survival. He believed that if they opened the gates to every witch and wizard regardless of birth, they were inviting danger into the very heart of their sanctuary. Gryffindor, however, saw this as a betrayal of everything Hogwarts stood for. He argued that courage and loyalty were not inherited. They were forged in the trials any witch or wizard could face. Hufflepuff stood beside Gryffindor, her unwavering belief in fairness and hard work refusing to let any child be turned away. Ravenclaw, ever analytical, tried to find a middle ground, perhaps a test of ability, perhaps a trial of loyalty, but Slytherin was not persuaded. The arguments grew sharper over the seasons. What had once been respectful debates over dinner in the Great Hall came tense confrontations in the private chambers of the founders. Slytherin accused Gryffindor of naive idealism. Gryffindor accused Slytherin of prejudice disguised as pragmatism. Hufflepuff wept at the division she saw destroying their dream. Ravenclaw tried to mediate, but she could not reconcile the fundamental difference. Slytherin saw Muggle-borns as a threat, while the others saw them as equals. The final confrontation that led to Slytherin's self-imposed exile from the school happened in the dead of winter. Snow had fallen thick over the grounds, muffling the castle in a silence that felt ominous. The four founders met in the underground chambers where Slytherin had already begun to work on something hidden. The entrance to a secret room that would one day be known as the Chamber of Secrets. That night, Slytherin laid his final terms before the others. Either the school would adopt his blood purity policy, or he would leave and take with him the knowledge of how to purge those he considered unworthy. Gryffindor refused. Hufflepuff refused. Ravenclaw, with heavy heart, refused as well. Slytherin did not beg. He did not curse them. He simply turned and walked into the darkness of the passage he had carved beneath the castle. He sealed the entrance behind him with magic so complex and ancient that even Gryffindor could not break it. And just like that, one of the four founders was gone. The school he helped build would continue without him, but it would never be the same. The Sorting Hat, in its wisdom, would go on to sing of how the four lived as brothers, but it could not erase the wound that Slytherin's departure left. In the years that followed, the other founders tried to fill the gap. Gryffindor took on more of the security duties. Hufflepuff worked tirelessly to reassure students, especially those of Muggle birth, that they were safe. Ravenclaw reorganized the dormitories and asked the house elves to watch for any signs of Slytherin's lingering influence. But deep below the castle, sealed in stone and shadow, something was waiting. A silent sentinel, coiled and patient, a creature born from Slytherin's own hatred and pride. The basilisk slept within its secret chamber, its eyes closed, its venom dreaming of the day it would be awakened. That is the story of the chamber's silent sentinel, a guardian of old prejudice, lying in wait for the heir who would one day speak its name. So the Great Schism had happened. Salazar Slytherin had walked away from the table, but he did not walk away from Hogwarts. While Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, and Rowena Ravenclaw believed the conflict was over, that Slytherin had left the castle in bitter defeat, the truth was far more deliberate, far more patient. Slytherin had not simply abandoned his vision, he had buried it. In the months and years that followed his departure, Salazar Slytherin returned to the castle unseen, moving through spaces only he knew. The other founders thought they had sealed the school against him, but Slytherin had woven his own protections into the very stones of Hogwarts. Long before the rift became public, He had spent years mapping the deepest layers of the bedrock, exploring caverns that predated the castle itself, and in secret, he began to build something that would outlast them all. The chamber he constructed was not a simple room. It was a hidden sanctuary, a vault of purpose, carved beneath the girls' bathroom on the first floor. That location was chosen with care, a seemingly ordinary, overlooked corner of the castle, where few would think to search. The plumbing network, already being expanded across the medieval fortress, provided the perfect disguise. No one thought to question the pipes that ran beneath the sinks, deeper than any drainage system needed to go. And deep within that labyrinth, Slytherin created a massive stone hall, lined with enormous serpentine columns, a statue of his own face looming at the far end. It was a tomb, it was a throne room, and it was a weapon. Into this chamber, he placed the basilisk. Not just any basilisk, but one bred for a singular purpose. Slytherin had been studying the oldest magics of serpent kind, the kind that could kill with a stare, that could petrify or destroy at will. He raised this creature from an egg, incubating it under a toad in the dark, feeding it on the raw essence of his own hatred for those he deemed unworthy. The basilisk grew, immense and ancient, its scales hardening like iron, its venom potent enough to rend even the strongest enchantments, and Slytherin commanded it to wait. He left instructions, etched in Parseltongue, on the inside of the statue's mouth, that only his true heir could command the serpent. The chamber would remain sealed until one of his bloodline returned. And when that heir finally spoke the words, the basilisk would emerge. Its purpose was not mere destruction, it was cleansing. Slytherin believed that Hogwarts had been polluted by the presence of Muggle-born students. To him, they were spies, corruptors, a threat to the magical lineage. The basilisk was his ultimate filter. It would purge the school of the impure, leaving only those with the right blood. The other founders, of course, knew nothing of this. After Slytherin left, they turned their attention back to the school's mission. Helga Hufflepuff worked tirelessly to ensure that all students felt welcomed, regardless of background. Rowena Ravenclaw's library grew, and her daughter's tragic departure consumed her thoughts. Godric Gryffindor busied himself with training young wizards in dueling and honor. They spoke of Slytherin only in whispers, as a cautionary tale. They never suspected that beneath their feet, in the dark silence of the castle's foundations, a serpent was sleeping. The school moved on. Decades passed into centuries. The founders themselves passed into legend. Hogwarts expanded, its walls absorbing new classrooms, new towers, new secrets. The girls' bathroom was renovated, the pipes rerouted, the memory of that hidden chamber fading, until it became a ghost story at best. A rumour whispered by generations of students who claimed to have heard whispers behind the walls, a hissing in the pipes, but the basilisk remained. It slept, coiled in its stone chamber, waiting for a voice that would not come for nearly 1,000 years. And that is the terrible irony of the Chamber of Secrets. It was built with the full weight of Slytherin's conviction, yet it remained utterly silent, a ticking time bomb no one knew existed. The school's inhabitants went about their daily lives, studying spells, brewing potions, playing pranks, while death lay coiled just a few floors below. The basilisk was not just a monster, it was a doctrine. It was blood prejudice made flesh, buried alive in the heart of the most magical place in Britain, and no one heard it breathing. But the world of magic did not stop at the gates of Hogwarts. The tensions that Slytherin embodied, the fear of muggles, the obsession with purity, did not vanish with his departure. They festered in other places, in other families. The wizarding community was still young, still learning how to govern itself. Soon, those tensions would demand a response, and the foundations of magical law would be laid. That story, the rise of the first formal Council of Wizards, is one of compromise and conflict. And it begins with a crisis that no one saw coming. The Chamber of Secrets was hidden, silent, waiting, its basilisk coiled in stone, a weapon for a future that might never come. But while Salazar Slytherin built his legacy of division beneath the castle, The magical world above ground was changing in ways far more profound than any single founder could imagine. The school itself had been a bold solution to a growing crisis, a need for protected education. But Hogwarts was only one institution. The wizarding communities scattered across Britain were still largely tribal, each valley or village cluster operating under its own local customs, its own unwritten laws. There was no unified voice, no central authority, and as the centuries pressed on, that lack of cohesion became dangerous. Imagine a patchwork of magical settlements, each led by a respected elder or a powerful family. They might trade potions ingredients, share news of Muggle movements, but when a crisis erupted, when a rogue enchantress began haunting a village, when a dragon strayed too close to a Muggle town, when a young wizard accidentally set fire to a neighbour's barn, there was no one to appeal to, no judge, no force that could act on behalf of all magical folk. Disputes were settled locally, often by the strongest wand or the oldest bloodline. And in times of great fear, such as the intensifying witch hunts that swept across Europe from the late medieval period onward, this fragmentation left the magical population terribly exposed. It was out of this fragmentation that the idea of a wizard's council first took root, slowly, informally at first, a gathering of the most respected magical figures from various regions, meeting in secret to discuss shared threats. Centuries before the Ministry of Magic, before the International Statute of Secrecy, there were councils. They were not elected, they were not democratic, they were assemblies of the powerful, prominent pure blood families, accomplished enchanters, guardians of ancient lore. Their purpose was simple: to make decisions that affected the whole magical community and to enforce those decisions with whatever authority they could muster. This transition from tribal groups to a centralized governing body was neither quick nor smooth. Old loyalties die hard. Local chieftains did not easily surrender their autonomy to a distant council, but the pressures of the outside world forced their hand. Muggle authorities were becoming more organized, more paranoid, more brutal. Witch trials were not just sporadic outbursts. They became institutionalized, backed by secular and religious law. The Tudor era in England, the Spanish Inquisition, the witch hunts in Germany and France. These were not isolated events. They were a crescendo of persecution that threatened to annihilate any magical person caught in the open. The council's struggle to maintain order as these witch hunts intensified was a defining trial. They could not simply fight back openly. That would have confirmed Muggle fears and invited even greater retaliation. Instead, they worked in shadows, establishing protocols for hiding magical activity, for erasing memories, for fabricating plausible explanations. They created covert networks to warn communities of approaching inquisitors. They developed charms to disguise magical dwellings, to make Muggles see only ruins or overgrown thickets where enchanted cottages stood. And they began, for the first time, to seriously debate the question of how to define a magical creature, who counted as a being with rights, and who was merely a beast subject to control. This was not an abstract philosophical exercise. It had urgent practical consequences. If a house elf was considered being, could it be owned? If a goblin was a being, did it have the right to carry a wand? If a centaur was a being, should it be subject to wizarding law? The early Wizards' Council grappled with these questions, often making arbitrary distinctions that would haunt magical society for centuries. They drew lines in the sand, categories that reflected not justice but convenience, not wisdom but fear. Goblins, for instance, were granted a degree of autonomy, but were prohibited from wielding wands. House elves were classified as beings, but treated as property. Centaurs were left alone, but only because they chose isolation. These early attempts to regulate magical creatures sowed deep resentment, especially among the goblins, whose proud metallurgy and financial acumen made them indispensable yet always subordinate. The council itself was far from monolithic. It was composed of wizards and witches who often disagreed violently. Some argued for complete secrecy from Muggles. Others wanted to maintain limited contact. Some championed the rights of half-breeds. Others insisted on pure blood supremacy. The tension between these factions could be as fierce as any battle. And more than once, the council nearly fractured into rival factions. But the external threat of the witch hunts forced them to find common ground, at least temporarily. They understood that if the magical world did not present a united front, it would be picked apart piece by piece. And so, the Wizards' Council became the first true government of magical Britain. It established the basic framework of laws that later evolved into the Ministry of Magic. It designated safe havens, regulated the use of dangerous artifacts, and began the long process of codifying magical law. It was not a benevolent institution. It was a product of its time, with all the prejudices and shortcomings that entailed, but it was a necessary step. Without it, the magical world might have remained scattered, vulnerable, and ultimately destroyed. Yet even as the council consolidated its power, another shadow was growing. The goblins, whose role in magical society was foundational yet always circumscribed, were beginning to chafe. Their resentment simmered beneath the surface of agreements, treaties, and grudging cooperation. They remembered the ancient wars, the broken promises, the way wizards had taken their finest creations and then denied them the right to wield magic freely. The council attempted to placate them with concessions, control of Gringotts, exclusive rights to certain metals. But these were half measures designed to buy peace rather than achieve justice, and sooner or later, that peace would shatter. The Goblin Rebellions are not a footnote in wizarding history. They are a bloody, recurring conflict that shaped the very structure of magical governance, that defined the boundaries between species, and that left scars still visible in Harry Potter's own time. But that is a story for another chapter. A chapter of fire and steel, of grudges older than the Hogwarts founders, and of a war that the Wizards' Council could not prevent. The Wizards' Council, in its early attempts to define who and what belonged in magical society, had drawn lines that would never truly fade. They classified beings, creatures, and spirits, setting hierarchies that placed human witches and wizards at the top. But one group refused to accept a subordinate role, the goblins, and their resistance would not be quiet or fleeting. It would spark centuries of bloodshed, shape the very economy of the wizarding world, and leave scars that ran deeper than any treaty could heal. To understand the Goblin Rebellions, you have to understand what goblins valued above all else: craftsmanship, ownership, and the right to wield magic on their own terms. They were master metalsmiths, capable of forging objects that could hold enchantments no human could replicate. Their silver sword blades drank in the properties of substances they were coated with, and their armor was near impenetrable, but goblins could not use wands. At least they were forbidden from doing so by wizard law, and that denial, that restriction on their own magical expression, became the core of a fury that would erupt again and again. The first major uprisings is recorded around the early 17th century, though tensions had simmered for centuries before. The goblins saw wizards as hypocrites. They preached unity among magical folk, but hoarded the tools of magic for themselves. A goblin could perform powerful enchantments without a wand. Yes, their own innate magic was formidable, but they were denied the right to carry and use a wand in public. It was a matter of status as much as practicality. Wizards feared that armed goblins would challenge their dominance, and they were probably right. But it was not just wands that kindled the flames, it was money. Gringotts Wizarding Bank, founded in 1474, had become the undisputed centre of magical finance, and it was run entirely by goblins. Their monopoly on banking was not a gift from wizards. It was a hard-won position carved out through centuries of negotiation and threat. Wizards needed a secure place to store their gold, and goblins were the only ones with the skills to create vaults that could resist any human magic. The deepest chambers of Gringotts were protected by dragons, enchantments, and traps, even the most powerful wizards could not breach. But the price of that security was a constant, simmering resentment. Goblins controlled the wealth of the wizarding world, and they never let wizards forget it. The rebellions themselves were bloody affairs. The most famous is the Goblin Rebellion of 1612, which centered on the village of Hogsmeade and left much of the area in ruins. The Three Broomsticks, that familiar inn, was allegedly used as a headquarters for the wizard forces during the conflict. Goblins fought with a fury born of centuries of oppression. They used their own magic, their cunning, and their knowledge of the land. They raided wizard settlements, seized treasure, and demanded not just rights, but artifacts they claimed were rightfully theirs. And here we arrive at the heart of the conflict: the ownership of legendary artifacts. Goblins believe that the maker of an object retains a permanent claim to it, even after it has been sold. When a goblin forges a sword, he considers it a part of his own being, a piece of his soul in metal. To sell it is merely to lend it. The true ownership never transfers. Wizards, of course, saw things differently. They paid good gold for goblin-made weapons and armor, and they considered those purchases absolute. But the goblins never forgot. They remembered every blade that had been taken from their forges, every cup, every crown, and when they rose in rebellion, they demanded the return of these treasures. The most famous of these is the sword of Godric Gryffindor, forged by goblins centuries before, even in Harry Potter's own time. The goblin Gryffindor would insist that the sword was stolen from his people, and that it belonged in the vaults of Gringotts, not in the hands of wizards. These wars shaped the deep-seated prejudices that lingered long after the last battle had ended. Wizards told tales of goblin greed, their love of gold, their treacherous nature. Goblins, in turn, whispered of wizard arrogance, their broken promises, their theft of goblin heritage. The rebellions did not end with a clean victory for either side. They ended with treaties, fragile, resentful treaties that gave goblins a degree of autonomy, but never full equality. Goblins were allowed to run Gringotts under strict regulation. They were not allowed to carry wands. They were not allowed to hold high office in the ministry. They were tolerated because they were useful, but they were never trusted, and that mistrust poisoned every interaction between the species. When a wizard walked into Gringotts to withdraw gold, he was not simply making a transaction. He was entering a space of ancient mutual hatred, barely concealed behind professional decorum. The goblins behind the counters looked at every human customer and remembered the rebellions. They remembered the fallen goblins, the stolen swords, the denied rights. The wizards, for their part, saw only surly creatures who held their gold hostage. But the rebellions also forced the wizarding world to organize itself more tightly. The Wizards' Council, which had been a loose assembly of influential magical families, evolved into the Ministry of Magic in 1707, largely to manage the threats from non-human beings and to enforce the new laws that would keep the magical world hidden from muggles. And it is that last point, the decision to retreat into secrecy, that would define the next chapter of this long history. The goblin conflicts had shown that the magical world was not just divided between wizards and muggles. It was fractured within itself, and the solution, when it came, was not reconciliation but retreat. In 1692, the International Statute of Secrecy was enacted, and the wizarding world began its great withdrawal from the sight of non-magical humanity. But that retreat also changed the relationship with goblins, centaurs, house elves, and all the other beings who shared the magical landscape. How the statute reshaped the balance of power and what it meant for those who were left behind is the story of the next chapter, 1692, the Great Retreat. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The Goblin Rebellions had left deep scars across the magical world, not just in Britain, but in every nation where the ancient race of metalworkers and bankers had been forced into uneasy truces with wizardkind. The gold in Gringotts vaults still flowed, but the memory of blood on marble floors lingered long after the last treaty was signed. Yet even as the wizarding world tried to stabilize its internal affairs, a far more existential threat was rising beyond the hidden villages and castle walls. Muggle persecution had never truly ceased, but by the late 17th century, it reached a fever pitch unlike anything before. You have heard of the Salem witch trials, of course, but what the history books leave out is that they were not an isolated outbreak of hysteria. They were the breaking point of a centuries-long pressure that had been building across Europe and its colonies. A pressure that finally forced the magical community to make an impossible choice. In the years leading up to 1692, witch hunts had become industrialized in the German states, in France, in Switzerland, in the British Isles and the American colonies. Muggles had developed increasingly effective methods of identifying and executing those they suspected of witchcraft. The trials were no longer sporadic village affairs orchestrated by local clergy. They were systematic, funded by magistrates, supported by informants, and amplified by the printing press. For the first time, magical families could not simply flee to the next town and start over. The reach of the hunters had grown too wide. The flames burned too hot. Thousands of witches and wizards perished, not because they were caught casting spells, but because a neighbour bore a grudge, or a child told a strange tale, or a cow gave sour milk. The fear was irrational, but fear does not need to be rational to be lethal. By the late 1680s, the magical governments of Europe were in crisis. Their traditional policy of selective concealment, hiding in plain sight while using memory charms and misdirection to protect isolated communities, was no longer sufficient. The Muggles were closing in. In Salem Village, Massachusetts Bay Colony, the hysteria that erupted in 1692 would become the most infamous episode, claiming at least 25 lives by execution or imprisonment. But dozens more had already died in similar purges across the continent that same decade. The magical authorities watched helplessly as their own kind were dragged before courts that offered no justice, only condemnation, and they understood that if something did not change, the entire wizarding world would face extinction within a generation. It was in this atmosphere of desperation that representatives from magical governments across the globe gathered for what would become the most inconsequential meeting in wizarding history. The exact location of the summit remains classified even today, but what emerged from those closed-door negotiations was the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy, signed in 1692 by every major magical nation then in existence. The statute was not simply a law, it was a covenant. It declared that from that moment forward, wizards and witches would voluntarily sever all visible ties with the Muggle world. No more flying broomsticks in broad daylight. No more healing of sick neighbours with a flick of the wrist. No more open commerce between magical and non-magical communities. The wizarding world would become a hidden civilization, operating in parallel to the Muggle world, but never intersecting with it. The decision was not unanimous. There were fierce debates. Many wizards argued that concealing themselves would only confirm Muggle superstitions and weaken their own magic. Others believed that they had a moral duty to protect Muggles from dark creatures and natural disasters, that hiding was an abandonment of responsibility. But in the end, the pragmatists won. The cost of exposure had become too high. The statute was ratified, and the Great Retreat began. And what a monumental task it was. Erasing magic from the collective Muggle memory required more than just a signature on parchment. It required a global magical operation of unprecedented scale. Obliviators were dispatched to every village, every city, every region where magic had been openly practiced or witnessed. They did not simply modify individual memories. They rewrote the cultural narrative. Stories of fairy folk and enchanted forests were relegated to the realm of children's tales. Historical records that mentioned real magical events were altered or destroyed. Entire families packed up their homes and moved to newly created magical enclaves, villages hidden by powerful enchantments that made them invisible to Muggle eyes. Diagon Alley, which had been a bustling market street on the edge of Muggle London, was sealed off and re-enchanted so that only magical folk could find its entrance. The same happened in Paris, in Rome, in Budapest, in every major magical centre across the world. The statute also mandated the destruction or concealment of magical creatures that could not be disguised. Dragons were moved to reservations in remote mountains. Hippogriffs and lestrals were hidden in forests, warded against Muggle intrusion. The werewolf population, already persecuted, was pushed further into the margins. The magical world receded like a tide, pulling back from her shore, leaving behind only faint traces that Muggles would dismiss as legend and superstition. The Obliviators worked tirelessly for years, and their efforts were largely successful. By the early 18th century, belief in magic had become a quaint folk tradition, a thing of the past. The Muggle world moved on, convinced that witches and wizards had never truly existed except in the fevered imaginations of their ancestors. But secrecy came at a price. The wizarding world became insular, suspicious, and increasingly stratified. The old families who had once mingled freely with Muggles now guarded their bloodlines as a matter of survival. Blood purity, which had been a fringe belief championed by Salazar Slytherin centuries earlier, began to gain mainstream acceptance as a way to preserve magical heritage in a hidden world. The Statute of Secrecy, intended to protect, also laid the foundation for the very prejudices that would later tear the magical community apart. It is a bitter irony that the same laws that saved wizarding civilization also planted the seeds of its darkest conflicts. The last echoes of the Great Retreat faded by the turn of the 18th century, and the magical world settled into its new existence, hidden and silent. But the work was not finished. The Ministry of Magic, founded in 1707, would inherit the enormous responsibility of maintaining the statute, of policing the boundary between worlds, of ensuring that no wizard ever again revealed their magic to a Muggle. And as the decades passed, the memory of the Burning Times grew dim, kept alive only in the whispered stories of old families and in the stone corridors of Hogwarts, where the founders had built their school in an age when magic still walked openly under the sun. You see, the world Harry Potter was born into, the world of Diagon Alley and the Ministry and the Quidditch pitches, is built on top of that decision, on the bedrock of 1692. Every time a witch or wizard apparates, every time a child receives their Hogwarts letter by owl, they are living inside the consequences of that great retreat. The Statute of Secrecy is not just a law, it is the very shape of the hidden civilization, the reason you have a secret world at all. But what does it take to maintain a fully hidden economy, an entire financial system, a network of shops and banks and schools that must never be seen? That is a question that would occupy the minds of magical economists and administrators economists for centuries. And the answer is far stranger than you might expect, because the wizarding world did not simply withdraw. It rebuilt itself from the ground up, creating infrastructure so cleverly disguised that even Muggles living directly above Gringotts vaults never suspect what lies beneath their feet. That story, the story of how a hidden economy was constructed brick by enchanted brick, is waiting just ahead. The ink on the International Statute of Secrecy had barely dried when the wizarding world began to realize the true cost of invisibility. For centuries, magical communities had lived interwoven with Muggle settlements, trading, marrying, and occasionally fleeing into the shadows when the witch hunts grew too fierce. But after 1692, that fragile coexistence was over. The statute demanded not just secrecy, but a complete severance. Every witch and wizard in Britain had to choose: withdraw entirely from Muggle society, or risk the wrath of both worlds. And so the Great Retreat began in earnest. Families packed up their homes, their cauldrons, their brooms, and their memories, and they looked for a place where magic could breathe freely again. London, with its sprawling ancient streets and hidden alleys, became the obvious sanctuary. For centuries, a small cluster of magical shops had operated quietly near the heart of the city, known only to those who could see through the enchantments woven into the brickwork. But after the statute, this enclave, Diagon Alley, was no longer just a marketplace. It became a lifeline. The Wizards' Council, still the governing body before the Ministry, moved quickly to secure the area. They poured protective enchantments into every stone and beam, layering disillusionment charms, anti-muggle wards, and a complex network of repelling spells that would make the entire street invisible to anyone without magical blood. They didn't just hide it, they fortified it. Diagon Alley became a fortified commercial hub, a walled city within a muggle city, accessible only through a battered old pub called the Leaky Cauldron. And behind that pub, behind that inconspicuous door, a complete hidden economy began to take shape. The first businesses had been there for generations: the apothecary, the bookshop, the cauldron merchant. But now, with the entire magical population retreating into these secret spaces, demand exploded. Wands wore out, potions ingredients became scarce, books of forgotten lore needed to be reprinted, and so new shops sprang up, each one filling a gap in the newly isolated society. There was a shop that sold nothing but quills and parchment, another that specialized in telescopes and celestial charts. A potion supplier expanded into the brewing of standard drafts for daily use, and at the very heart of the alley, where the cobblestones curved toward the Gringotts entrance, there stood a narrow, dusty establishment that had been serving wizards longer than almost any other: Ollivanders. Ollivanders was not a new name in magical London. The family had been crafting wands since the year 382 before the Common Era, according to their own records. But for most of that history, wand making was an art closer to folklore than to science. A wand was carved from a tree that felt right, paired with a core from a creature that seemed powerful, and then tested by trial and error. The results were unpredictable. A wand might work brilliantly for one witch and fail utterly for another. Families passed down wands as heirlooms, often with mixed success. But in the centuries leading up to the statute, a few wand makers, the Ollivanders chief among them, began to treat their craft as something far more rigorous. They started keeping meticulous records. They experimented with different woods, different cores, different lengths and flexibilities, and they wrote down every outcome. They studied how a wand responded to its owner's magical signature, how the core interacted with the wood, how the wand's personality could influence spellcasting. By the time the statute was signed, the Ollivander family had compiled generations of data that would transform wand making from a folk tradition into a precise scientific discipline. Garrick Ollivander, the most famous of the line, would later refine this knowledge into an almost mathematical system. He believed that the wand chooses the wizard, not just a poetic sentiment, but a measurable phenomenon. Every wand had a unique combination of wood, core, and length that resonated with a specific magical frequency. And in the years following the Great Retreat, as wizards flocked to Diagon Alley in search of reliable tools, Ollivanders became the place where a young witch or wizard would receive their first and most important instrument. The accuracy of Ollivander's craft was legendary. He could look at a customer for moments, observe the way they held their hand, the tilt of their head, the subtle flicker of their aura, and then reach for a box on a high shelf that no one else would have thought to open, and the wand inside would be perfect. This was no accident. It was the product of centuries of accumulated knowledge, refined into a system that the rest of the wizarding world had not yet fully grasped. Ollivanders became synonymous with quality. If you bought a wand from anywhere else, it might work. If you bought one from Ollivanders, it would work perfectly. and that reputation helped anchor Diagon Alley as the commercial centre of magical Britain. But wands were only one part of the hidden economy. The wizarding world needed food, clothing, medicine, and currency. Gringotts, the goblin-run bank, had been operating since 1474, and its vaults held the wealth of countless ancient families. The goblins had their own rules, their own hierarchy, and their own grudges against wizards, but they understood money better than any human. They created a stable currency system based on galleons, sickles, and nuts, and they provided vaults that were virtually impossible to breach. This gave the hidden economy a backbone of trust. Even if that trust was fragile and sometimes broken by rebellion, around Gringotts and Ollivanders, the rest of the alley filled in organically. A pub called the Leaky Cauldron became the unofficial gateway and a meeting place for news. Flourish and Blots sold textbooks that were essential for the growing number of magical children who now had no choice but to be educated in secret. The apothecary supplied potions ingredients that had once been traded openly in Muggle markets, but were now restricted. Magical creatures that had roamed the British countryside freely were now driven deeper into the Forbidden Forest or kept in magical menageries. The entire ecosystem of magical life, its commerce, its education, its governance, its culture, had to become self-contained. It had to be a parallel civilization, running silently beneath the Muggle world's awareness. That transformation was not instant. It took decades, even centuries, for the wizarding world to fully adapt. The first generation after the statute struggled with isolation. Families who had lived near Muggles felt a terrible loneliness. Young wizards who had been sent to Hogwarts now had to hide their studies from their Muggle neighbours during the summers. The need for secrecy became a constant hum in the background of every magical life, and as the generations passed, the memory of open coexistence faded. By the 1800s, most wizards had never known a world where they could walk freely down a Muggle street without hiding their wand. The statute had reshaped the magical mind as much as the magical landscape, and in that reshaping, new institutions began to rise. The Wizards' Council, which had been a loose assembly of elders and influential families, found itself overwhelmed by the demands of managing a secret society. Laws needed to be created, enforced, and recorded. Boundaries between magical and Muggle territories had to be policed. The accidental magical events of children and untrained adults had to be contained and explained away. The council realized that it needed a real government, a ministry of magic, with departments, regulations, and a bureaucracy that could handle the sheer complexity of hiding an entire civilization. That realization would lead to the next great transformation. The Ministry of Magic was not born overnight. It emerged from decades of debate, compromise, and occasionally violent disagreement. But its creation would change everything. It would centralize power, standardize laws, and create a permanent infrastructure for the hidden world. And it would set the stage for the conflicts and triumphs that would eventually lead to the birth of a boy who would one day walk through the same Diagon Alley into Ollivanders and receive a wand that was perfectly, inescapably his. The hidden economy of Diagon Alley had grown into a bustling, self-contained world, but it was a world built on a fragile foundation. For centuries, the Wizards' Council had governed magical Britain, a loose assembly of the oldest and most powerful families, passing decrees that were often more like suggestions than laws. But the International Statute of Secrecy of 1692 changed everything. No longer could wizards simply hide in plain sight, trusting in a few memory charms and the Muggles' willingness to look the other way. The statute demanded absolute concealment, and the old council was simply not equipped to enforce it. Something had to give, and in 1707 it did. The Wizards' Council was dissolved, and in its place rose the Ministry of Magic. This was not a smooth transition. It was a bureaucratic earthquake. The old families who had held seats on the council for generations suddenly found themselves sharing power with appointed officials, department heads, and a newly created Minister for Magic. The first to hold that title was Ulick Gamp, a stern-faced wizard who had spent years as a senior member of the council, known for his relentless efficiency and his unwavering belief that secrecy was the only path to survival. Gamp understood that the statute was not a one-time agreement. It was a living document that required constant vigilance. His first major act was the creation of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. This was the backbone of the new ministry, the force that would hunt down rogue magic, erase Muggle memories, and prosecute those who broke the statute. The department grew quickly, spawning sub-departments like the Auror Office, the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, and the Obliviator Headquarters. Bureaucracy, in Gamp's mind, was the shield that would protect the wizarding world from discovery. Every law, every form, every procedure was designed to seal the cracks through which magic might leak into the Muggle world. The expansion was immense. The ministry needed clerks to track magical incidents, coordinators to manage the international flu network, and a whole division dedicated to controlling the breeding of mythical creatures that might be spotted by Muggles. Offices were carved out of the underground levels of what would become the ministry's headquarters. Deep beneath Whitehall, ink pots and parchment stacks filled corridors that smelled of old stone and fresh sealing wax. Ulick Gamp's portrait still hangs in the ministry today, a reminder of the moment when the wizarding world chose order over tradition, secrecy over freedom. But even as the ministry grew, there were those who whispered that this new institution was too powerful, too centralized, too eager to meddle in the private lives of witches and wizards. Old families resented being told how to behave. Independent wand makers worried about licensing laws. Yet the statute held, and the ministry proved its worth. For the first time, magical Britain had a single voice, a single hand to guide its hidden existence. And yet, beneath the surface of this new order, older currents still flowed. The blood prejudices first planted by Salazar Slytherin had not been washed away by bureaucracy. They had only found new channels. The ancient families who had once ruled the council still held influence, and the ministry's pure blood faction began to stir. The stage was set for conflicts that would echo through centuries, conflicts that would eventually draw in a boy born in 1980. But before that boy could grow, there was another legacy to consider, a legacy of competition, danger, and the tragic deaths that had already claimed young wizards before they ever reached adulthood. That legacy would become known in the annals of magical history as the Triwizard Legacy. The Ministry of Magic had only been in existence for a few decades when the first whispers of a new kind of cooperation began to circulate among the great wizarding schools of Europe. You see, by the late 13th century, Hogwarts was no longer a lone experiment. Bogues Batons had risen in the French Pyrenees, and Durmstrang had established itself far to the north, in the frozen wilderness of Scandinavia. These three institutions, each with their own traditions and proud histories, existed in relative isolation, and isolation in the magical world often bred suspicion. So it was that in the year 1294, a bold idea took shape. The heads of the three schools, the founders, descendants and successors, met in secret, far from Muggle eyes. They proposed a contest, a tournament, not merely a test of magical skill, but a festival of unity. They called it the Triwizard Tournament, and from its very first iteration, it was designed to forge bonds through danger. The rules were simple. Each school would select one champion, a student of age, to represent them in 3 magical tasks. The tasks would be designed by the host school, rotating each year between Hogwarts, Bogsbatons, and Durmstrang. The champions would compete for glory, for a cash prize, and for the legendary Triwizard Cup. But what began as a celebration of international magical fellowship quickly revealed a darker side. You have to understand the nature of 13th century magic. It was raw, unpredictable, and often lethal. The tasks were not carefully regulated obstacle courses. They were life or death trials, drawn from ancient myths and dangerous enchantments. In the first tournament, hosted by Hogwarts, the champions were sent into the Forbidden Forest to retrieve a golden egg from a nest of acromantulas. One champion never returned. The second tournament, held at Bogs Baton's, involved a descent into a sunken grotto guarded by merpeople and a nest of grindylows. Another champion drowned. The death toll mounted with each passing decade, yet the tournament continued. Because the bonds it created were real, rivalries turned into lifelong friendships. Trade routes opened between the three schools. Wand makers from different countries shared techniques. Potions masters exchanged recipes. The Triwizard tournament became the crucible in which international magical relations were forged through dangerous competition. It was a paradox. The same contests that killed young wizards also united their families. By the late 14th century, the death rate had become unacceptable, even by the brutal standards of the medieval magical world. The tournament was suspended indefinitely after an especially gruesome task in Durmstrang that involved a captive dragon and a frozen lake. But the idea did not die. It lingered in the collective memory of the wizarding world as a symbol of what could be achieved when schools set aside their differences and tested their finest. And then, centuries later, there came a revival. The Triwizard tournament was resurrected in the late 20th century, carefully regulated, with safety measures and a lower age limit. But even then, its dark legacy could not be entirely erased, because the tournament had never been just about competition. It had always been a mirror of the tensions between bloodlines, nations, and magical philosophies, and no one understood those tensions better than the old wizarding families, who had built their fortunes on the very alliances was meant to forge. Among those families, one name stood out above all others in the shadowy corridors of power: Malfoy. Their story, intertwined with the history of magical politics and blood purity, is the next chapter in this untold era. How did a single family accumulate so much influence, wealth, and danger? What secrets did they carry from the 13th century into the age of the Ministry? That is where our journey now turns, into the Malfoys and the Aristocracy. The Triwizard tournament had been a spectacle of pride, a chance for the great schools of Europe to measure their wizarding prowess against one another. But beneath the cheering crowds and golden trophies, a quieter, more enduring contest was already underway. A contest not of magical skill, but of status, blood, and influence. While champions duelled for glory, the old families of Britain were weaving themselves into the fabric of power, laying the foundations of an aristocracy that would define wizard society for centuries to come. To understand the Malfoys, you have to understand the Sacred 28. That list, first compiled in the 1930s by a pure-blood extremist named Cantankerous Knot, was a roll call of the families who, in his view, had kept their magical bloodline completely pure, no muggle or muggle-born taint over the centuries. It was a political document disguised as a genealogical record. By naming the 28, Knot implicitly damned everyone else. Families like the Weasleys, who were pure blood but considered blood traitors for their sympathies, were excluded. The Potters, though old and respected, were left off because they had married Muggle-borns in the past. The list was a weapon, a way to draw a line between the worthy and the unworthy. But the ideology behind it was far older. The concept of pure blood supremacy had been simmering since the days of Salazar Slytherin. But it took on a new, organised form in the centuries after the Statute of Secrecy. Once the magical world withdrew from Muggle sight, it had to define itself from within. Who belonged? Who was truly magical? The old families, the ones who could trace their lineage back to the founders, began to see themselves as a natural ruling class. They had the oldest wands, the grandest estates, the most ancient libraries of spells. They saw Muggle-borns as upstarts, their magic accidental, their blood thin. The Malfoys were among the most prominent of these families. Their roots stretched back to the Norman conquest, through a wizard named Armand Malfoy, who arrived in Britain with William the Conqueror. Armand was cunning. He used his magic and his wealth to acquire vast lands, and his descendants learned to navigate both Muggle and wizard courts with equal skill. Over generations, the Malfoys became masters of the quiet art of influence. They didn't just hoard gold, they invested it in the right connections. They married into the Blacks, the Greengrasses, the Rosiers. They built a web of alliances that made them untouchable. When the Ministry of Magic was founded in 1707, the Malfoys were already there. Lucius Malfoy I served on the Wizards' Council that transformed into the new government. The early ministry was not a democratic institution. It was a council of the powerful. The minister was chosen from among the old families, and those families controlled the key departments. The Malfoys helped shape the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the Court of Appeals, the very rules that governed magical Britain. They didn't need to hold every office themselves. They just needed to ensure that the people who did were indebted to them. This integration into the ministry's power structure was gradual but deliberate. The old aristocracy saw the ministry as a tool, a way to formalize their authority and protect their interests. They wrote laws that favored inheritance taxes on wealthy estates, but not so high as to diminish their own hoards. They regulated wand permits and magical creature rights in ways that kept power centralized. They ensured that the most prestigious positions, like the head of the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, went to members of the Sacred 28. The ministry became a club, and the membership list was very exclusive. But not all old families agreed on how to handle the rising tide of Muggle-borns. There was a fundamental divide between those who clung to the old guard's isolationism and those who saw an opportunity. Some families, like the Weasleys and the Potters, openly welcomed Muggle-borns into their circles. They married them, they taught them, they considered them equals. Others, like the Malfoys, viewed this as a betrayal of everything that made wizarding society great. To them, blood purity was not just a preference, it was the foundation of their identity. If you diluted the blood, you diluted the magic. This social divide grew wider as the 19th century bled into the 20th. The ministry, despite its aristocratic roots, began to change. More and more Muggle-born witches and wizards entered its ranks. They were bright, ambitious, unburdened by old feuds. They rose through merit, not name. For the old guard, this was a threat. Their power had always been tied to their lineage. If anyone could become a ministry official, what was the point of a generations-old surname? The Malfoys, the Blacks, the Lestranges. They felt their world slipping away, and so they turned to darker solutions. They funded secret societies that promoted blood purity. They pressured the ministry to pass laws restricting Muggle-born rights. They whispered that the old ways were the only ways, that magic itself was being corrupted by impure blood. They were careful. They never acted openly. The Malfoys especially mastered the art of plausible deniability. They donated to charity, hosted elegant galas, and smiled for the press while quietly funding the kind of ideology that would eventually birth Lord Voldemort's movement. The Sacred 28 was a response to that pressure. It was a desperate attempt to define and defend a dying aristocracy. But lists have a way of leaving people out, and the ones left out, the families who had married Muggle-borns, the families who had fallen on hard times, the families who simply didn't fit the mold. They became the cracks in the foundation. One of those left-out families was the Gaunts. The Gaunts were pure blood, perhaps more purely than the Malfoys. They could trace their line directly to Salazar Slytherin, but they were also poor, violent, and deeply paranoid. While the Malfoys were building mansions and ministry alliances, the Gaunts were decaying in a hovel, hoarding their bloodline like a curse. They represented the dark side of the old aristocracy, a family so obsessed with purity that they forgot to adapt, forgot to thrive, forgot everything except their hatred. Their story is a cautionary tale, a warning of what happens when blood becomes more important than life itself. And it is in that decay, that the seeds of Tom Riddle's obsession were first planted. Chapter 16. The Gaunt family's decay. The Malfoys had built their fortune through cunning, marriage, and careful alignment with power, but not every ancient family managed to hold the threads together. Some bloodlines frayed, twisted, and finally snapped under the weight of their own pride. And the most tragic example in all of wizarding history is the House of Gaunt. Now, if you know the name Gaunt at all, you know it as the family of Tom Riddle's mother, Merope Gaunt. But the story of the Gaunts stretches back centuries before her birth. And it is a story of decline so complete that by the time we reach the 1920s, the once proud descendants of Salazar Slytherin and the Peverell brothers are living in a filthy hovel on the outskirts of Little Hangleton. They are impoverished, they are inbred, and they are consumed by a rage that has curdled into madness. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to the origins of the house. The Gaunts could trace their lineage directly to Salazar Slytherin himself. And, through Slytherin, they carried the blood of the Peverells as well. Cadmus Peverell, the second of the three brothers, had been the original owner of the Resurrection Stone. That stone, one of the three Deathly Hallows, had passed down through his descendants, eventually winding up in the hands of the Gaunt family. It became their most treasured heirloom, but they kept it hidden, not as a prized artifact to be displayed, but as a secret inheritance to be clutched and guarded. The Gaunts had once been wealthy. They owned land, they held influence, and they commanded respect in pure blood circles. But over generations, that respect curdled into suspicion. The Gaunts became reclusive. They stopped marrying into other families, preferring instead to keep their bloodline pure. And when you marry within the family, generation after generation, you do not preserve strength. You amplify weakness. The intellect dims, the temper shortens, the health frays, and the fortune begins to slip away. By the late 19th century, the Gaunts had lost almost everything. The family estate was gone, sold off piece by piece to settle debts. All that remained was a small ramshackle cottage on a patch of land that no one else wanted, near the Muggle village of Little Hangleton. And they lived there, the last three members of the house, in squalor. Marvolo Gaunt, the patriarch, was a cruel and violent man. He wore the family ring on his finger, a heavy gold band set with a black stone, the Resurrection Stone, though he never knew its true power. To him, it was simply a symbol of his lineage, a reminder of his supposed superiority over everyone around him, especially Muggles and Muggle-borns. Marvolo had two children, a son named Morfin and a daughter named Merope. Morfin was twisted, both in mind and in body. He spoke in Parseltongue with his father, a language they used to shut out the rest of the world. He was aggressive, unstable, and prone to violent outbursts. And Merope, poor Merope, was the quiet one. She had none of her father's pride, none of her brother's aggression. She was beaten down, neglected, and desperate for any kind of affection. She could do magic, but her father called her a squib because she showed little talent, though the truth was that her magic was suppressed by the constant brutality of her home life. The Gaunt family embodied the tragic decline of a once great bloodline. They were the descendants of Slytherin, the heirs of the Peverells, and they had reduced themselves to a life of poverty, violence, and hatred. The family fortune was gone, the respect was gone. All that remained was a tarnished ring, a locket that had once belonged to Salazar Slytherin, and a legacy of bitterness. Then, in the 1920s, the Muggle authorities came. A ministry official named Bob Ogden arrived at the Gaunt cottage to investigate Morfin's use of magic against a Muggle, but Ogden was met with hostility. Marvolo Gaunt refused to acknowledge the authority of the ministry. He pointed to his family line, his ancestry, as if that should exempt him from the law. He even flaunted the ring, showing off the Peverell crest carved into the black stone. Ogden, unimpressed, attempted to fine them. Marvolo flew into a rage, and Morfin attacked Ogden with a curse. The confrontation ended with the Gaunts being dragged before the Wizengamots. Marvolo and Morfin were sentenced to Azkaban, and that left Merope alone. Now you might think that being free of her father and brother would have been a relief, but Merope had never been taught how to survive on her own. She had no money, no connections, no practical skills. The only thing she had was her desperate love for a muggle named Tom Riddle Sr., the handsome son of the local landowner. Merope had been watching him from afar for years, and now, with her family gone, she saw her chance. She used a love potion to ensnare him. They eloped, they were married, and for a time, Merope believed she had found happiness. But the love potion is not love. It is a spell, a counterfeit, and when Merope became pregnant, she made a choice. She stopped giving Tom the potion. She wanted him to love her of his own free will, or not at all. But when the potion wore off, Tom Riddle Sr. woke up. He saw where he was, who he was with, and he was horrified. He abandoned her. He went back to Little Hangleton and told everyone that he had been tricked. Merope, pregnant and alone, made her way to London. She was destitute. She could barely feed herself. And on the last day of the year, in 1926, she gave birth to a son in a Muggle orphanage. She named him Tom Marvolo Riddle, and then she died. Within the hour, or perhaps within the day, she was gone, leaving behind only her son and the tarnished ring that she had taken from her father. That ring, with the resurrection stone, still set in the black metal, was left in the possession of the orphanage, passed along with the infant's meagre belongings. The Gaunt family line, in name, ended with Merope's death, but the blood did not end. It lived on in her son, Tom Riddle. He would grow up in that orphanage, unaware of his heritage, until the day he learned the truth. And when he discovered that he was the heir of Slytherin, when he claimed the ring and the locket and the legacy of the Gaunts, he would not restore the family. He would destroy it and everything else in his thirst for immortality. But before we reach that point, we must go back to the very beginning of Tom Riddle's life. We must see the orphanage, the first signs of his power, and the path that led him to Hogwarts. That story is about to unfold, and it will take us deep into the shadow of a child who would become the darkest wizard of the age. That is a tale for another chapter, and it begins in 1926 with an omen no one yet recognised. The Gaunt family had crumbled into ruin, their pride a bitter, hollow echo of the power they once held. In their miserable shack, surrounded by the debris of faded greatness, lived Merope Gaunt, the last daughter of a dying bloodline. She was a young woman barely acknowledged, a shadow in a household ruled by a violent father and a brother who inherited all the cruelty and none of the ambition. But Merope carried within her a desperate, quiet flame, a longing for something beyond the filth and the fury, and that longing would lead her to a man she could never truly have, except through the most dangerous of magical deceptions. On the outskirts of Little Hangleton, the Riddle family lived in a fine manor, wealthy and respected in Muggle society. Tom Riddle Sr. was the heir to that fortune, a handsome, arrogant young man who had no idea that a witch watched him from afar. Merope saw him often as she crept past the village, and she fell into a love that was less about understanding and more about escape. She had nothing to offer him. Not beauty by conventional standards, not wealth, not even the magics that her brother and father hoarded with contempt. But she had one skill that her family had never taught her. She knew how to brew a love potion, and so she did. Day after day, Merope used a simple but powerful charm to ensnare Tom Riddle's heart. She spiked his drink, and soon he came to her. Drawn by an artificial devotion that he could not explain, they ran away together, married, and for a short time, Merope believed she had built a life worth living. But the potion's effect was a lie, and lies cannot sustain a marriage. When Merope allowed herself to stop dosing her husband, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of a foolish hope that his love had become real, the enchantment shattered. Tom Riddle Sr. left her without a word, returning to his manor and his family, leaving Merope pregnant and utterly alone. Now consider what it means to be born under the influence of a love potion, not as a child conceived in a moment of romance, but as a product of coercion and chemical force. That child, Marvolo Riddle, was never meant to be loved. He was the result of his mother's desperation, a desperate attempt to escape her own misery. And in that act, Merope had unwittingly denied her son the most fundamental of human experiences, the experience of being conceived in genuine affection. The love potion creates the illusion of love, but it cannot create love itself, and so the child who entered the world on the 31st of December, 1926, carried no trace of warmth from his parents. He was born in a grim London orphanage, his mother having died shortly after giving birth, leaving him alone with nothing but a name and a strange power he did not yet understand. That orphanage was cold, grey and unyielding. It was a place of routine and neglect, where children were numbers and discipline was harsh. Young Tom Riddle grew up in those corridors of damp stone and echoing silence, surrounded by boys and girls who feared him without knowing why. He was intelligent, but his intelligence was isolated. He was handsome, but his looks were a mask. He had no friends, only followers he dominated through fear. The mundane world, the world of muggles with their limited vision and petty cruelties, became the object of his hatred. He despised the orphanage, despised the ordinary, despised the very fabric of a life that had been imposed upon him. It was here in those early years that the foundation of a future Dark Lord was laid, a child who could make things happen without a wand, who could punish bullies and dangle trophies from rafters, who could speak with snakes and sense the hidden. He did not know he was a wizard by name, but he knew he was different, and that difference became his pride. He was not yet Voldemort, but the seeds were sown. He was Tom Riddle, the unwanted son of a man who abandoned him, and a woman who died to give him life born of an unnatural charm. And as you drift into sleep, remember that even the darkest shadows begin with a single fragile moment. The child who would become the terror of the wizarding world first opened his eyes in a damp cot in a city that did not care. But before he found his path, another figure was already watching, already waiting. A man with half-moon spectacles and a quiet, penetrating gaze. That man would one day step into the orphanage, and the story would begin to twist in ways no one could predict. Next, we will uncover the early shadow of Albus Dumbledore and the choices that set two destinies on a collision course. In the summer of 1899, a young man named Albus Dumbledore made a friend, and in doing so, nearly lost himself entirely. That same summer, far away in a different part of Britain, a baby was born into a family that seemed determined to destroy itself. But that is a story you already know. Tom Riddle entered the world under a love potion's shadow, and his path would one day collide with the Dumbledore legacy. But before that collision could happen, Albus Dumbledore had to first learn the most painful lesson of his life. That power, no matter how noble the intention, must be handled with extreme caution. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore was born in 1881 into a family already marked by tragedy. His father, Percival, was sentenced to life in Azkaban for attacking 3 Muggle boys, an act born of rage and grief after their daughter, Ariana, had been shattered by a traumatic experience. Ariana was never the same after that day. Her magic turned wild, unpredictable and dangerous. She could not control it, and for years the Dumbledore family kept her hidden, ashamed and desperate to protect her from the world that had hurt her. Their mother, Kendra, held everything together until she died in a magical accident, perhaps triggered by Ariana herself, though the truth remains buried in whispers. Suddenly, 17-year-old Albus found himself the head of the household, burdened with a brilliant mind and a burning ambition that now seemed impossible to fulfill. He had planned to travel the world, to seek out the deepest secrets of magic, to make his mark on history. Instead, he was stuck in a small cottage in Godric's Hollow, caring for a sister whose condition was fragile and whose future was uncertain. He resented it. He never said it aloud, but he resented the chains that held him. And then Gellert Grindelwald appeared, a young wizard as brilliant as Albus himself. Expelled from Durmstrang for dark experiments, carrying a vision of wizarding domination, that he called the greater good. Grindelwald arrived in Godric's Hollow to stay with his great-aunt Bathilda Bagshot, and he met Albus almost immediately. They recognized each other as equals, as kindred spirits. They spent weeks crafting a plan to overturn the International Statute of Secrecy, to unite wizards and muggles under the wise rule of the magical elite, to take control for the betterment of all. It was intoxicating. Albus felt free for the first time since his father's imprisonment. He believed he had found someone who understood him, someone who saw his potential and was unafraid to reach for greatness. But there was a third person in that house, Ariana, and Aberforth, Albus's younger brother, who saw Grindelwald for what he was: dangerous, manipulative, and utterly reckless. Aberforth confronted Albus, demanding that he abandon the mad plan, that he remember their sister, their family, their duty. Albus refused. The argument grew bitter, and then Grindelwald stepped in. What exactly happened next is not fully known. There was a duel, a fight between three powerful wizards. Ariana may have tried to intervene, or her unstable magic may have erupted. In the chaos, a spell flew wide, and Ariana Dumbledore was killed. Her death struck like a thunderbolt. Grindelwald fled, terrified of the consequences. Albus was left kneeling on the ground, his dream shattered, his sister dead, and a guilt that would never truly leave him. He had been willing to sacrifice everything for power, for glory, for the greater good. And in that moment, he understood something that would define the rest of his life. Power must never be trusted without humility, without love, without the constant awareness of what it can destroy. Albus Dumbledore never sought the position of Minister for Magic, though he was offered it many times. He never pursued the mastery of the Elder Wand for selfish purposes, though he eventually possessed it. He spent the next decades teaching, guiding, and protecting, but always with a heavy awareness of his own fallibility. The tragedy of Ariana taught him that even the best intentions can lead to the worst outcomes, and that the line between wisdom and arrogance is thin enough to be crossed in a single reckless moment. And so, as the 20th century moved forward, Albus Dumbledore became the man we meet in Harry's time. Careful, secretive, sometimes manipulative, but always haunted by the ghost of a sister he could not save. He knew that darkness was not always born in places like the Gaunt Shack or the orphanage where Tom Riddle grew up. Sometimes darkness begins in a well-lit room full of high hopes, with two brilliant friends who thought they could change the world and forgot to check the damage they were leaving behind. That is the shadow that Albus Dumbledore carried with him into every decision he made, especially the decisions he would have to make about the boy born in 1926, because soon that boy would enter Hogwarts, and Dumbledore would be watching. What he saw there would test everything he had learned about redemption, about choice, and about the limits of forgiveness. That story is waiting for you in the next chapter, Riddle at Hogwarts. And so, as Albus Dumbledore carried the weight of his sister's death and the ashes of his friendship with Grindelwald, the wizarding world turned another page. The scars of that dark alliance had healed. But the lessons were not forgotten. Dumbledore, now a respected professor at Hogwarts, watched as a new generation of students arrived each September. Among them, in the autumn of 1938, came a boy who would reshape the very meaning of darkness. Tom Marvolo Riddle stepped onto the platform at King's Cross with an expression that was neither wide-eyed nor fearful. He was 11 years old, but he carried himself like someone who had already survived a war. The orphanage had taught him to hide his true self behind a mask of politeness, and he had perfected that mask long before he ever laid eyes on a wand. When he entered Hogwarts, he saw it not as a school, but as a kingdom waiting to be claimed. From the very first day, Tom was different. He was handsome, articulate, and unnaturally composed. Teachers found him charming, even gifted. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge. But beneath that eager curiosity lay a hunger that went far beyond grades. He wanted to know where he came from. He wanted to understand the magical blood that ran through his veins. And most of all, he wanted to prove that he was special. Not because of any ordinary talent, but because of a legacy that had been hidden from him his entire life. He began in the library, not in the casual way of a student skimming assigned texts, but with a systematic, almost obsessive determination. He traced names, dates, and lineages. He searched for any mention of the name Riddle in magical families, but found nothing. That did not discourage him. Instead, it ignited a new line of inquiry. If his father was not magical, then his mother must have been. And if his mother was a witch, then her family held the key to his true identity. Tom Riddle's obsession with his heritage became the engine that drove every action he took at Hogwarts. He learned that his mother's name was Gaunt, and that the Gaunts were a once proud pure-blood family, direct descendants of Salazar Slytherin himself. But the Gaunts had fallen into poverty and madness. Living in a shack near Little Hangleton, the revelation hit Tom like a thunderclap. He was the heir of Slytherin. That knowledge became the cornerstone of his entire self-image. He did not speak of this openly. Instead, he began to cultivate a circle of followers, students who admired his confidence, his intelligence, and his mysterious air of authority. He called them the Knights of Walpurgis. The name was deliberately obscure, evoking the dark traditions of medieval witchcraft. These were not mere friends, they were disciples. They carried out tasks for him, gathered information, and provided the protection of numbers. Tom never used threats or crude force. He did not need to. He charmed them with promises of power, of belonging, of being part of something greater than themselves. And he manipulated the teachers with equal skill. Professor Slughorn, the head of Slytherin House, was particularly susceptible to Tom's flattery. Tom would attend Slughorn's parties, laughing at his jokes, asking thoughtful questions about rare magical objects. Slughorn took pride in collecting talented students, and Tom was the prize of his collection. He never suspected that under that polished exterior, a darker game was being played. Tom also earned the trust of the headmaster, Armando Dippet, who saw only a brilliant and well-behaved student. But there was one teacher Tom could not bend, Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore saw the coldness behind Tom's eyes, the calculated charm, the lack of empathy. He kept a watchful distance, but he did not expose Tom, perhaps because he had no concrete evidence. The years passed and Tom's power grew. He delved deeper into dark magic, reading forbidden books in the restricted section, learning secrets that had been hidden for centuries. And always, he returned to the legend of the Chamber of Secrets. The chamber, he learned, was Salazar Slytherin's hidden legacy, a vault beneath the school containing a monster that only the true heir could control. Tom was convinced that he was that heir. He spent 4 years searching for the entrance, using his followers and his own growing magical ability. Finally, in his 5th year, he found it. He opened the chamber, and the basilisk, the serpent of Slytherin's making, was unleashed upon the school. The first victim was a girl named Myrtle Warren, a Muggle-born student who was found dead in a bathroom. The school was thrown into panic. The attacks continued, and suspicion fell on a half-giant named Rubeus Hagrid, a kind-hearted boy who kept dangerous creatures. Tom Riddle saw his opportunity. He framed Hagrid by planting evidence and anonymously tipping off the authorities. Hagrid was expelled, his wand snapped, and though Dumbledore managed to keep him as a groundskeeper, the stain of suspicion never fully lifted. Tom, meanwhile, had successfully diverted all attention away from himself. When the chamber was closed and the basilisk put to sleep, Tom Riddle had achieved exactly what he wanted. He had proven to himself that he was Slytherin heir, that he could control the monster, and that he could manipulate the entire wizarding world without ever being caught. The framing of Hagrid was a masterpiece of misdirection, a lesson in how to use the innocent as pawns. Tom left Hogwarts with top honours, a flawless reputation, and a dark knowledge that would soon bear terrible fruit. But his time at school was only the beginning. The real quest lay ahead. The search for something even more profound than lineage. A quest that would lead him to split his soul and create objects of unimaginable evil. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. Tom Riddle left Hogwarts with more than a diploma and a trail of whispered fear. He left with a name already stained, a diary already dark, and a plan already unfolding. But the world outside the castle walls was far larger than the corridors he had mastered, and the secrets he sought were not taught in any classroom, so he vanished for a time. Not into obscurity, but into the shadows where the oldest magic was kept, the kind that had been forgotten by the many and buried by time. He travelled first to distant lands, where ancient dark wizards had once practiced arts that modern wizards barely dared to mention. He walked through crumbling temples in far-off mountains, studied scrolls left by sorcerers who had lived centuries before Hogwarts was founded. He listened to the whispers of ghosts in forgotten libraries, and he paid in coin or in terror for the knowledge that few would share willingly. Each step drew him deeper into the dark corners of the magical world, where the boundary between life and death was thin, and where the oldest magic was not a legend, but a living, dangerous force. He learned things there that no living wizard had ever written down. He learned that the soul could be broken and hidden, that death could be cheated, that immortality was not a dream, but a price, and he found that the tools for that price were waiting for him. Objects of immense power, relics of the founders themselves, scattered across the world by time and chance. He knew he could not make his Horcruxes from ordinary things. They had to be worthy of his greatness. They had to be vessels of history, of magic, of the very essence of the wizarding world. And so, when he returned to Britain, he did not announce himself. He did not seek power openly. Instead, he took a humble position at Borgin and Burke's, a dark little shop in Knockturn Alley, where the desperate and the wicked came to sell what they should never have owned. His appearance had already begun to change. The handsome boy was fading, replaced by something paler, colder, more serpentine. But he still wore a mask of charm, and he used it to smile at the old witch who walked in one afternoon, clutching a heavy locket and a golden cup. Her name was Hepzibah Smith, and she was rich, vain and gullible. She believed she was the last descendant of Hufflepuff, and that she had inherited two of the most precious heirlooms ever made: the cup of Helga Hufflepuff and the locket of Salazar Slytherin. She showed them to Tom Riddle with the pride of a woman who had never known real power, only the reflected glow of old names. She trusted him. She invited him into her home, into her confidence, into the room where the treasures were kept. He visited her often, listening to her rambling stories, flattering her with the only warmth he could fake. And one night, he killed her. It was swift and silent, a mercy she did not deserve and a crime he barely felt. Then he took the cup and the locket, the two relics that would become his vessels for two more pieces of his fractured soul. He left her body for her house elf to discover, and he walked away into the London fog, carrying the weight of centuries in his hands. That night marked the point of no return. He had already made one Horcrux from the diary of his youth. Now he added two more, and he did not stop there. In the years that followed, he sought out other objects of power: an ancient diadem from Ravenclaw, a cup from Hufflepuff, a locket from Slytherin, a ring from the Gaunt family that was also a relic of the Peverells. He murdered for each of them, sometimes with his own hands, sometimes through his followers, but always with the same cold precision. And as he killed, he split his soul again and again, becoming less human with every death. The transformation was not just physical. His voice grew softer, more sibilant. His face lost its last traces of youth, became gaunt and pale, with slits for nostrils and eyes that burned red in the dark. He no longer called himself Tom Riddle. He was Lord Voldemort, a name that men spoke in whispers, a name that made mothers hold their children closer. The Knights of Walpurgis, the followers he had recruited at Hogwarts, became his first true Death Eaters, bound to him by fear and by the mark he burned into their arms. He was no longer a student, no longer a shop assistant, no longer even a man. He was a walking wound, a being of pure ambition and terror, driven by the one thing he could never have, the certainty of his own survival. The Horcruxes were his anchors, his insurance against mortality, and he would do anything to keep them hidden. He buried them in places no one would look, guarded by creatures no one could defeat, and sealed with magic no one had ever broken. But the world was not blind. The disappearances, the murders, the strange attacks, they began to accumulate, like blood pooling under a door. The Ministry of Magic started to notice. Aurors were dispatched, and a few wizards, old and wise, began to connect the dots. They saw the rise of a shadow that would soon darken all of Britain. The First Wizarding War was about to begin, and no one knew yet that at the heart of it was a boy not yet born, whose birth would change everything. Tom Riddle had vanished into the shadows of Eastern Europe, and for a few years, the wizarding world breathed a little easier. The whispers of a dark wizard gathering power had not yet become a roar, but the quiet was only a mask. The Horcruxes were being made, each one a splinter of a soul that was becoming less human by the day. And by the late 1960s, that serpentine figure had returned to Britain, reborn with a new name that struck terror into the hearts of those who dared speak it. Lord Voldemort. The 1970s descent into terror began not with a single explosion, but with 1,000 small, chilling whispers. A ministry official found dead in his home, his body untouched, but his mind shattered. A Muggle-born witch vanished from her job at St. Mungo's, never seen again. A family of prominent purebloods was found in their drawing room, all three staring blankly ahead, perfectly still, as if waiting for instructions they could not hear. These were not accidents. These were the first public kisses of the serpent's fangs. Voldemort had not returned to wage a conventional war, not at first. He had spent years studying the most insidious forms of magic, and he understood that the strongest fortress is not the one with the thickest walls, but the one whose defenders are already inside, wearing familiar faces. So he unleashed the Imperious Curse. It was a weapon far more dangerous than any explosion or killing curse. The Imperious placed its victim entirely under the controller's will, erasing their personality, their loyalty, their very sense of self. And once the spell was cast, the victim looked no different than before. They walked to work, greeted colleagues, attended meetings, all while carrying a puppet master's orders deep within their mind. The Ministry of Magic was utterly unprepared. They had protocols for dark wizards in masks, for curses that left visible marks, for battles that could be seen and counted. But how do you fight an enemy who could be sitting in the chair next to you, smiling as they hand you a file, and all the while their true allegiance is to a lord they have never even met? The Imperious Curse created a crisis of trust that no amount of oral patrols could solve. Every official, every clerk, every assistant became a potential threat. The ministry's internal security, which had been designed to guard against outsider attacks, was completely blind to the enemy within. And the Death Eaters, as Voldemort's followers now called themselves, exploited this blindness ruthlessly. They did not need to storm the ministry in a blaze of fire. They simply whispered Imperio into the ears of a dozen middle-ranking bureaucrats. Suddenly, the ministry's own records were being altered, reports of attacks were being buried, and oral resources were being diverted to false leads. The very institution that was supposed to protect the wizarding world became a slow, stumbling beast, hobbled by its own internal spies. It was in this atmosphere of suspicion that no one knew who to trust. Families stopped talking to neighbours. Old friendships dissolved overnight. A quiet knock at the door could mean a cup of tea, or a green flash that ended everything. The wizarding world had known fear before, the fear of muggles, the fear of Grindelwald, but that fear had been external. This was different. This was a poison creeping through the veins of the community, turning every glance into an accusation. People began to look at their colleagues and wonder, was that sympathetic nod a genuine gesture, or the signal of a traitor? Were the Aurors investigating Voldemort's followers, or were they led by them? The very concept of safety collapsed. There was no place to hide, because the enemy could be hiding inside your own head. The Death Eaters became bolder. They began to attack in plain sight, wearing their masks and robes, conducting raids on villages, torturing those who resisted, and leaving the dark mark floating in green smoke above their victims' homes. The mark was not just a symbol of terror, but a statement. We are here, and you cannot stop us. And the Ministry, paralyzed by infiltration and mistrust, could only respond with slow, bureaucratic gestures. They passed laws. They increased Auror recruitment. They tried to create an anti-imperious task force. But every measure was too late, too little, and often compromised by the very spies they could not identify. The war that Voldemort had been planning for decades was now fully underway. It was not a conflict of clean borders or clear battles. It was a war of whispers, of shadows, of friendly faces that suddenly turned cold. A war where your own wand could be turned against you by a curse you never saw coming. And in the midst of this creeping darkness, a few brave souls began to gather, wizards and witches who refused to accept that the world was lost. They met in secret, in hidden rooms, in the corners of pubs, and they whispered a name that would soon become a beacon of resistance, the Order of the Phoenix. What that order would become, and what sacrifices it would demand, would shape the next decade more than anyone could possibly imagine. By the end of the 1970s, the wizarding world was fracturing under a shadow that had grown far beyond any dark wizard in living memory. The Ministry of Magic, once the sturdy pillar of magical Britain, had become a labyrinth of suspicion and paralysis. Imperiused officials sat in their offices, giving orders that served Voldemort's end, while honest Aurors could not trust their own colleagues. The very fabric of society was being unstitched, thread by thread, and it was clear that the old ways of fighting darkness would not be enough. It was in this atmosphere of creeping dread that Albus Dumbledore made a decision that would shape the war to come. He could not rely on the Ministry alone. The institution was too compromised, too slow, too bound by procedure. What was needed was something smaller, faster, and utterly loyal. Something that operated in the shadows, parallel to the official apparatus, but free from its chains. And so quietly, without fanfare, Dumbledore began to gather those he trusted most. He called them the Order of the Phoenix. The formation of the Order was not a public declaration. There was no grand ceremony, no parchment signed in triplicate. It was a whispered invitation, a meeting in a hidden room, a handshake that meant more than 1,000 oaths. Dumbledore reached out to the bravest and most capable wizards and witches he knew. People who had already proven they would stand against the darkness even when no one was watching. Among them were the Marauders, the Longbottoms, and the Pruets. The Marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, had only recently left Hogwarts, but their loyalty to Dumbledore and their skill in the field were beyond question. James and Sirius were natural fighters, quick-witted and daring, with a touch of recklessness that sometimes bordered on foolishness. Remus brought a steadying calm and a keen tactical mind, owned by years of managing a condition that would have broken a lesser spirit. And Peter, small and eager, was eager to prove himself, though his capacity for courage was still untested at that depth. The Longbottoms, Frank and Alice, were already Aurors of considerable renown. They had earned their reputations in the early skirmishes of the war, facing Death Eaters in dark alleyways and abandoned houses. Frank was known for his relentless pursuit of justice, a man who never let a lead go cold. Alice was a brilliant duelist, her spells as precise as they were powerful. Together, they were formidable, and their presence in the Order lent it an air of professional seriousness that balanced the youthful energy of the Marauders. And then there were the Pruets, Gideon and Fabian, brothers whose courage was legendary even among the bravest. They were known for their fiery spirits and their willingness to take on impossible odds. In the Order, They became something like the shock troops, the ones who volunteered for the most dangerous missions, the ones who would never ask anyone else to do what they, themselves, would not dare. Their laughter could be heard in the headquarters, even on the darkest days, a defiant sound that reminded everyone why they were fighting. The Order's missions were as varied as its members. Some were straightforward protection details, shielding Muggle families who had been marked for death, moving them to safe houses under cover of night. Voldemort's followers delighted in targeting Muggles, not just to spread terror, but to draw out the wizards who tried to protect them. The Order learned to be swift, silent, and invisible. They would arrive before the Death Eaters, cast protective enchantments, and vanish like ghosts. Other missions were more about intelligence. The Order needed to know where Voldemort would strike next, who his new recruits were, what dark artifacts he was gathering. This meant cultivating informants, intercepting messages, and sometimes placing their own members undercover. It was a dangerous game of shadows, where one wrong word could mean exposure and death. Dumbledore orchestrated it all from his study at Hogwarts, a quiet centre in the storm. He rarely went into the field himself, but his knowledge and his connections were the Order's greatest weapon. The Order's headquarters moved often. At first they met in an old house in London, then in a series of safe houses that were warded and hidden. Finally they settled at number 12, Grimmauld Place, the ancestral home of the Black family, offered by Sirius after his own estrangement from his bloodline. The house was dark and dusty, filled with portraits of screaming pure-blood ancestors, but it was secure. It became the heart of the Resistance, a place where maps were studied, plans were made, and losses were mourned. And there were losses. The war was brutal, and the Order was not invincible. Members fell in skirmishes, in ambushes, in moments when the luck simply ran out. The Pruitt brothers, Gideon and Fabian, were among the first to fall. They were cornered by 5 Death Eaters in a narrow street, and though they fought with a ferocity the attackers would remember for years, they were overwhelmed. Their deaths sent a shock through the Order. It was a reminder that no one was safe, that the enemy was ruthless and relentless, but the Order endured. They had to, because behind every mission, every sleepless night, every whispered warning, there was the knowledge that Voldemort was growing stronger, and that only by standing together could they hope to stop him. The Order of the Phoenix was not a government, not an army, not an institution. It was a family bound by trust, by purpose, by a shared refusal to let the darkness win. And in the midst of all this, a different kind of story was unfolding. A story of 4 friends who had created something extraordinary during their own school years, something that would outlast them and become a legend of its own. That story belongs to the Marauders and the map, and it deserves to be told in full. The Order of the Phoenix had risen in the shadows of Voldemort's first war, a desperate gathering of witches and wizards who refused to let the darkness consume everything. Among them were 4 young men, barely out of Hogwarts, whose friendship had been forged in the fires of mischief and loyalty. They were James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, the Marauders. But before they became soldiers in a war, before the betrayals and the losses, they were simply 4 boys who found each other in the corridors of a school that would shape their destinies. Their story begins in the early 1970s, a time when Hogwarts was still a place of wonder and secrets, and when the world beyond its walls had not yet demanded their courage. James Potter arrived at Hogwarts in 1971, a year marked by the first stirrings of the Dark Movement that would later consume Britain. He was sorted into Gryffindor, a natural home for his boldness and his thirst for adventure. James was not just a talented wizard, he was a magnet for trouble, a boy whose charisma drew others into his orbit. On the Hogwarts Express, he met Sirius Black, a scion of the most ancient and most dark wizarding family, the Blacks. Sirius had rejected everything his family stood for, and his hatred for the pure blood ideology burned as fiercely as James's desire for excitement. They became inseparable. Two pranksters who saw the castle not as a place of learning, but as a playground for their audacious schemes. In their second year, they encountered a quiet, clever boy named Remus Lupin, who seemed to carry a burden they could not yet name. Remus was pale, often tired, and once a month he disappeared to the hospital wing with an illness that the staff whispered about. James and Sirius, with their instinct for secrets, determined to uncover the truth. They did not bully or mock him. They watched and they waited, and eventually they cornered him. Remus, terrified they would reject him, confessed that he was a werewolf. The transformation, the isolation, the fear of hurting others. It was a curse that had defined his childhood. James and Sirius did not flinch. They embraced him as a brother, and so the three of them became four when Peter Pettigrew, a small, nervous boy who admired them from afar, wormed his way into their circle. Peter was not brave in the way James was, nor rebellious like Sirius, nor burdened like Remus. He was eager to please, desperate to belong, and they accepted him as a friend. Never suspecting the price that acceptance would one day demand, the four of them became known as the Marauders, a name that echoed through the stone corridors of Hogwarts long after they had left. Their mission was twofold: to master the castle's secrets and to help Remus. Every month, Remus was forced to transform into a wolf under the full moon, locked in the Shrieking Shack to protect others from his savagery. The three other boys refused to let him suffer alone. They decided to become animagi, wizards capable of transforming into an animal at will, so they could keep him company in his wolf form. This was no small feat. Animagus transformation was dangerous, illegal without ministry registration, and required years of study and practice. They worked in secret, consulting forbidden books, practicing under the cover of night, and risking their lives with every botched attempt. By their 5th year, they succeeded. James became a stag, large and proud, which gave rise to his nickname Prongs. Sirius became a great black dog, Padfoot, his canine instincts sharp and loyal. Peter became a rat, small and unassuming, which he called Wormtail. And when the moon rose, these three animals would run beside Remus as a wolf, keeping him company and preventing him from harming himself or others. It was during these years of experimentation and loyalty that they created the Marauders map. The map was born from their intimate knowledge of Hogwarts passages and their desire to know every inch of the castle. James had a talent for enchantment, Sirius for imagination, Remus for theory, and Peter for the small details that tied the whole together. They combined their gifts to produce a parchment that revealed in real time every person's location within the castle and its grounds. The map was a masterpiece of magic, a testament to their bond and their brilliance. It was also a tool for mischief, allowing them to evade teachers, sneak into restricted sections, and laugh at the unwitting adults who thought they had control. The map responded only to them, and they named themselves the Marauders with a flourish. Its creation was an act of love as much as it was an act of rebellion, a way to stay together, to protect one another, and to know that no secret could hide from their friendship, that the years at Hogwarts were not merely pranks and transformations. The shadow of Voldemort grew longer, and even within the castle's walls, the war began to seep in. The Marauders were Gryffindors, but not all students shared their values. The Wizarding War of the 1970s was not fought only in dark alleys and Death Eater rallies. It was fought in the Great Hall, in the common rooms, in the choices made by young people who would one day become soldiers. James and Sirius clashed with Severus Snape, a Slytherin student who was deeply entangled with the future Death Eaters. Their rivalry was personal and vicious, and it culminated in an incident that could have cost Remus his secret and his freedom. When Sirius, in a moment of reckless cruelty, told Snape how to enter the Whomping Willow and reach the Shrieking Shack where Remus was transformed, James saved Snape's life at the last moment. The act was both heroic and tragic. It revealed the deep flaws in their friendship, the arrogance that could have led to disaster, and the loyalty that, for a time, held them together. They graduated in 1978, stepping from the relative safety of Hogwarts into a world at war. James and Lily Evans, the brilliant fierce witch who had initially rejected his advances, fell in love. They married, and soon Lily was expecting a child. Sirius, ever the loyal brother, joined the Order of the Phoenix, as did Remus. Though his werewolf nature made many distrust him, Peter too became a member, though he was never quite at the centre of the group's trust. The bond that had been forged in secret animagus experiments and late-night map-making was now tested by the demands of battle. They spied, they fought, they risked everything. James and Lily went into hiding, protected by the Fidelius charm, and chose Peter as their secret keeper, trusting him above all others. That trust became the shattering point. The friendship that had once allowed them to become animagi together, to map every secret of Hogwarts, to run under the full moon as brothers. That friendship was shattered by betrayal. Peter, weak and terrified, turned to Voldemort, and on the 31st of October, 1981, he led the Dark Lord to the Potter's home. James died trying to defend his family. Lily sacrificed herself so that Harry might live, and Sirius, falsely blamed for the betrayal, was sent to Azkaban without trial. Remus lost everyone he loved, and the Marauders were no more. The map, that beautiful creation of their youth, was confiscated by Argus Filch and eventually passed into the hands of Harry Potter, who never knew the story of its makers until it was almost too late. But before the prophecy was made, before the night that changed everything, there was a moment when 4 boys stood in a torchlit corridor, their wands glowing, their laughter echoing off ancient stone. They held a piece of parchment that showed them the world, and they believed they were invincible. They did not yet know that the friendship they built would be tested by the darkest magic, or that one of them would become the reason for a war that would outlast them all. The prophecy that would seal Harry's fate had not yet been uttered, but it was coming, and the next chapter will reveal how that prophecy was delivered and how it set the final chain of events into motion. The years of the Marauders at Hogwarts were a strange interlude, a pocket of youthful defiance and friendship that would soon be crushed by the weight of war. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. They had their maps, their pranks, their secret animagus transformations. They ran the corridors under the invisibility cloak, learning every secret passage, every hidden room. But the world outside Hogwarts was burning, and while they played at being heroes in the safety of the castle, the real war was tightening its grip on Britain. By the late 1970s, the Order of the Phoenix was fighting a losing battle. Voldemort's Death Eaters moved like shadows through the Ministry, through the streets of Diagon Alley, through the very fabric of wizarding society. The prophecy, the one that foretold the birth of a child who could defeat the Dark Lord, was still unknown to most, but whispers had begun, and the one person who knew exactly where that prophecy would be delivered was Albus Dumbledore. He had been watching Sybil Trelawney for years, a seer whose gift was erratic, half buried under layers of theatrical nonsense. Yet he sensed a moment was coming. It happened at Hog's Head Inn, a grimy, low-ceilinged pub in Hogsmeade, frequented by those who preferred to keep their business out of the public eye. Dumbledore had arranged to meet Trelawney there, away from Hogwarts, away from prying eyes. He had a reason, though he never fully explained it. Perhaps he felt the prophecy was too dangerous to be spoken within the castle walls. Perhaps he knew that the room above the pub was the only place where the fabric of fate would tear just enough for the words to emerge. Trelawney was nervous, fidgeting with her sherry glass, her oversized glasses slipping down her nose. She rambled about her grandmother, about the inner eye, about the trivial details of her life. Dumbledore listened patiently, his blue eyes fixed on her with a calm that belied the tension in the air. And then it happened. Her voice faltered, her eyes rolled back. Her body went rigid, as if possessed by something ancient and cold. The words that came out were not her own. They were a rasping, hollow cadence, a voice that seemed to rise from the very stone of the inn. She spoke of a child born as the 7th month dies, a child marked by the power of the Dark Lord as his equal. The prophecy was short, precise, and devastating. It named no names, but it drew a circle around 2 possible fates, the Potters or the Longbottoms. And because of that prophecy, the war would no longer be fought in the shadows of the Ministry or in the skirmishes of the Order. It would become deeply, terribly personal. But there was someone else in that pub, a young man barely out of his teens, with sallow skin and greasy black hair. He had been sent by the Dark Lord to observe Dumbledore, to report on any suspicious meetings. His name was Severus Snape. He had been a Death Eater for years, driven by a blend of ambition, bitterness, and a twisted loyalty to the cause. But his loyalty was not absolute. It was fractured by a love he could never reclaim, a love for Lily Evans, now Lily Potter. Snape was not in the room with Dumbledore and Trelawney. He was outside, pressed against the grimy window, his wand low, his ears straining. He heard only the final part of the prophecy, the part that spoke of the Dark Lord marking the child as his equal. He did not hear the full context. He did not know that the prophecy could have applied to Neville Longbottom as easily as to Harry. All he knew was that Voldemort would stop at nothing to hunt down the child of Lily Potter, and that knowledge tore him apart. He reported what he heard to his master. He delivered the partial truth, the fragment that would seal the fates of James, Lily, and Harry. Voldemort, in his arrogance, immediately targeted the Potters. He saw in the prophecy a threat that must be eliminated, a child born with the power to destroy him. He did not pause to consider that his own actions, his choice to attack that family, would fulfill the very prophecy he sought to avert. That was the flaw in his reasoning, the one he never understood until it was too late. Dumbledore learned of the eavesdropping soon after. He pieced together who had been in the pub, who had overheard, and in that moment, he understood something terrible. The war was no longer a political conflict, no longer a struggle for control of the Ministry or the conquest of magical Britain. It had become a hunt for a child. It had become a race against time to protect a family he loved, and the spy in his midst, the one he had hoped could be saved, had just delivered the death warrant for 2 of his best soldiers. That night, Dumbledore sat alone in his study, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He knew that the prophecy had been spoken, that the pieces were in motion. He knew that Voldemort would strike soon, and he knew that the choice of which child to protect, which family to shield, would be made not by fate, but by the Dark Lord's own hand. The war had become personal, and the only question left was who would survive the ending. That choice, the terrible burden of being the heir to the prophecy, would fall to a child not yet born, or to a child already breathing in a crib in Godric's Hollow. The next chapter of this story is one of impossible decisions and heartbreaking sacrifice. It is the story of a family who chose to hide, and a traitor who chose to betray them all. It is the story of the night the Dark Lord fell, and a boy survived. That chapter is called The Choice of the Heir. The words of the prophecy had barely faded from the air before they were carried, incomplete, to the darkest ears in the wizarding world. Severus Snape, having overheard only the first half of Sybil Trelawney's trance, brought to Lord Voldemort the news that a child born at the end of July would possess the power to vanquish him. But the prophecy named no names. It spoke only of a child born to those who had thrice defied the Dark Lord, born as the 7th month died. 2 families, 2 possibilities, and 1 choice that would decide the fate of an era. Voldemort retreated into the cold silence of his own mind, weighing the candidates like a chess master studying a board made of bone and shadow. On one side, there was Neville Longbottom, born to Frank and Alice Longbottom, pure-blooded auras of impeccable lineage, respected and feared in equal measure. On the other, Harry Potter, the son of James and Lily Potter, a half-blood child born into a family that had never claimed ancient aristocracy. The logic of blood purity would have pointed him toward Neville, The Longbottoms were among the Sacred 28, their family tree untainted by Muggle ancestry for centuries. But Voldemort, for all his rhetoric, had never truly believed in his own propaganda. He knew himself to be the heir of Salazar Slytherin through his mother's line, yet his father was a Muggle. His power came from magic, not from lineage, and so he looked past the blood, past the social standing, and saw something else. He saw himself in Harry Potter, the half-blood child of a witch and a wizard who had both defied him. The boy who, like Tom Riddle, had been born to parents who were not pure, but who burned with a talent for defiance. Voldemort recognized the echo of his own rise in the Potters' story. They were outsiders, not part of the old establishment, yet they had earned the loyalty of Dumbledore, the trust of the Order, and the fear of the Death Eaters. To destroy the Longbottoms would be to crush a symbol of pure blood authority, but to destroy the Potters would be to erase a threat that mirrored his own origin. And perhaps, in that mirror, he saw a chance to prove that only he could transcend his half-blood beginnings. The choice was not about purity. It was about who was most dangerous to his empire. So Voldemort chose Harry. He marked the infant, not with a curse, but with a decision. A prophecy fulfilled by the act of targeting. The moment he set his mind on the cottage in Godric's Hollow, the path was sealed. The Longbottoms would live, scarred but alive, while the Potters would become the focus of the Dark Lord's relentless hunt. And out of that choice came the greatest weapon against him. In the months that followed, James and Lily Potter went into hiding. They had already been living a life of shadows, moving between safe houses. But now the threat was personal and immediate. Dumbledore proposed the Fidelius Charm, an ancient spell of such power that a secret could be hidden inside a living soul, never to be found unless the Keeper chose to reveal it. The Potters agreed, and they chose their Keeper with trust born of friendship. Sirius Black, James's best friend, was the obvious candidate, loyal, clever, and willing to die for the cause. But at the last moment, a shift occurred. Peter Pettigrew, the quiet one, the one everyone underestimated, was named as the Secret Keeper instead. It was a decision made in the hope of misdirection, a plan to use Peter as a decoy while Sirius played the bluff. The Fidelius Charm was cast, and the cottage in Godric's Hollow became invisible to all eyes, tucked away from the world inside a bubble of trust and magic. James and Lily settled into a quiet routine, tending to Harry, hoping the war would end before he grew old enough to understand fear. But the secret was only as strong as the Keeper who held it, and the Keeper had already made a different choice, one that would undo everything. That is where we stand now, on the precipice of a betrayal so complete that it will echo through the decades. The next chapter, The Secret Betrayal, will reveal the moment the Potters' hidden sanctuary was torn open by the hand they trusted most. The choice was made. Voldemort, having weighed the two possibilities born at the end of July, had settled on Harry Potter, not Neville Longbottom, a pure-blood whose parents were both Aurors, but the half-blood son of James and Lily. The prophecy had spoken of a child with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, and Voldemort, in his arrogance, believed he could control which child that prophecy applied to. He would mark Harry as his equal by striking first, but to strike, he needed to know where the Potters were hiding, and that is where the quietest friendship of the Marauders would unravel the entire war. Peter Pettigrew had always been the shadow among the four. At Hogwarts, he was the tag-along, the one who struggled to keep up with the brilliance of James, the bravery of Sirius, and the quiet endurance of Remus. He became an animagus not out of daring but out of devotion. He wanted to belong, and belonging for Peter was everything. After school, when the Order of the Phoenix was formed, he joined without hesitation. But joining the Order meant facing real danger. The Pruitt brothers were cut down. Edgar Bones and his family were murdered in their home. The Death Eaters were relentless, and the Ministry was crumbling. Peter saw the corpses, heard the names whispered in mourning, and felt the cold fear settling into his bones. He was not built for a war where the enemy could be your neighbour, where trust was a liability, and Voldemort, through his network of spies and informants, knew how to find the weak points. The Death Eaters could offer safety, power, or simple survival. What they offered Peter was a way out, a way to stop being afraid. The exact moment Peter Pettigrew turned is not recorded in any history book. It happened quietly, in the shadows of a pub or the corner of a street, a whispered exchange that placed the traitor inside the Order's innermost circle. From that moment, everything the Order planned was fed back to Voldemort. The locations of safe houses, the movements of key members, the strategies discussed in secret meetings. But the most valuable information was still out of reach. The location of the Potters. The Fidelius charm had been cast. James and Lily were hidden in Godric's Hollow, and the secret was locked inside a living secret keeper. That keeper was Sirius Black, James's closest friend, the brother he'd chosen over blood. It seemed foolproof. Sirius would rather die than betray his friends. But Sirius had a blind spot. He trusted Peter Pettigrew with the same reckless loyalty that had made him jump to become an animagus for Remus. When the war pressed in, Sirius began to fear that he himself was too obvious a target. Voldemort would come for him, torture him, break him, and then the secret would be lost. So Sirius suggested a change. He proposed that the secret keeper be switched to someone Voldemort would never suspect. Someone weak, someone overlooked, someone like Peter Pettigrew. It was a logic born of love. Voldemort would go after Sirius, but he'd never bother with Peter. James agreed. He trusted Sirius with his life, and if Sirius thought Peter was the safer choice, who was he to argue? So the switch was made. The spell was recast. The Potter's location became locked inside the soul of Peter Pettigrew. He now held the single most important secret in the wizarding world, and he was already Voldemort's man. The final week of October 1981 arrived with a deceptive calm. The leaves had turned in Godric's Hollow, and the little cottage nestled behind the hedges felt like a sanctuary. James and Lily spent their days with their 1-year-old son, unaware that their safety rested on a foundation of betrayal. Peter Pettigrew, meanwhile, was completing his mission. He would approach Voldemort directly, offer the information, and the trap would snap shut. But he needed a way to disappear afterward, to frame someone else for his treachery. Who better than Sirius Black, the man who had trusted him? Peter would stage his own death, leave evidence pointing to Sirius, and vanish into the shadows as a rat. Quite literally. On the morning of October 31st, Peter Pettigrew went to Voldemort. The Dark Lord learned the exact location of the Potter home. The secret that was meant to be unbreakable had been handed over willingly. The final piece of the puzzle was in place. All that remained was the journey to Godric's Hollow and the curse that would change everything. But what happened inside that cottage on that Halloween night is a story that begins with a door opening and ends with a child who could not be killed. The legend of the boy who lived starts in the space between a mother's final plea and a spell that refused to hold. And that is the story we will tell in the next chapter. The moments inside Godric's Hollow as the trap closed around the Potter family, and the one unexpected horror that Voldemort never saw coming. Halloween at Godric's Hollow. The secret keeper had been changed. Sirius Black, the loyal and reckless friend, had convinced the Potters to switch to Peter Pettigrew, the one no one would suspect. And so, on the night of October 31st, 1981, the fate of the wizarding world balanced on a single betrayal. Godric's Hollow was quiet under a cold autumn sky. The village, with its charming cottages and winding lanes, had long been home to wizards and witches who valued privacy and tradition. The Potter's house stood modestly among them, a small stone dwelling with a thatched roof and a garden that Lily tended with pride. Inside, the warmth of a crackling fire painted the walls in soft amber light. James and Lily had put Harry to bed early. He was just over a year old, with his mother's bright green eyes and his father's untidy black hair. They had no reason to think that night would be different from any other. The war was raging, yes. Death Eaters roamed freely, and Voldemort's power seemed unstoppable. But here in this hidden home, they felt safe. The Fidelius charm was unbreakable, or so they believed. The clock on the mantelpiece read just past 7 in the evening. James sat in an armchair, reading a book on transfiguration theory, while Lily moved about the kitchen, humming a lullaby. The sound of Harry's gentle breathing drifted down the hallway. It was a perfect, fragile moment of peace. And then the front door opened. Though no one had knocked, Peter Pettigrew stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes darting. He had led the Dark Lord here. The betrayal was complete. James rose instantly, one drawn, a shout forming on his lips. But Voldemort did not give him time. The green light of the killing curse filled the room, and James Potter fell. No last words, no chance to defend his family. He was gone before his body hit the floor. Lily heard the crash. She knew. She ran from the kitchen, her heart hammering, and saw her husband's body slumped against the wall. But she did not stop. She ran past him, up the stairs, into the nursery where Harry's crib stood. She swept him into her arms, backing into a corner, her voice raw with desperation. "Not Harry, please no, take me, kill me instead." Voldemort followed her. He stood in the doorway, his red eyes gleaming, his voice a cold whisper. He told her to step aside. He said he would spare her if she moved. But Lily Potter did not move. She would not move. She stood in front of her son, her arms wrapped around him, and she repeated her plea. "Not Harry, please. Have mercy, have mercy." It was a refusal that defied logic. A mother facing an immortal monster with no chance of victory, and yet she chose to stay. She invoked something older than any spell or wand. She invoked love, pure and unconditional, a sacrifice freely given. That act of willing selflessness triggered a form of ancient magic, a protection that predated the Ministry, the Statute of Secrecy, even the founders of Hogwarts. It was the deepest magic, rooted in the soul itself. Voldemort's patience ended. He raised his wand, and the green light struck Lily Potter. She fell without a sound, her body sliding to the floor beside the crib. But her sacrifice had already begun to weave its power. It was not a spell she cast. It was a covenant she made with death itself. Now Voldemort turned to the child. Harry stared up at him, uncomprehending, his tiny hands reaching for his mother's face. The Dark Lord spoke the words of the killing curse, the same incantation that had never failed. Avada Kedavra. The jet of green light shot toward the baby's forehead, but it did not kill him. The curse struck Harry, but instead of ending his life, it rebounded. It hit the ancient magic that Lily had just activated, and it shattered. The green light reversed course, tearing back into Voldemort's body. His flesh ripped apart, his form disintegrated into a wailing mist of agony. The house exploded outward, windows shattering, walls crumbling, and then silence. Voldemort was gone. Not dead, but reduced to less than a ghost. His physical body destroyed, his soul fractured and fleeing, and on Harry's forehead, a wound shaped like a lightning bolt began to burn, a scar that would never fully heal. The night of October 31st ended with a cradle of wreckage, a child crying in the dark, and the first great turning point in a war that was far from over. The boy who lived, that would become his name. But before he could be found, before Hagrid arrived, before Dumbledore made the decision that would shape his life, there was only the firelight flickering on a broken home, and the whisper of ancient magic that had just rewritten fate. The house at Godric's Hollow was still smouldering when the first of them arrived. The roof had collapsed in a tangle of blackened beams, the upstairs windows blown outward, as if the building itself had exhaled one final, violent breath. And in the rubble of the nursery, a single cot stood untouched, the blanket still folded at the foot, the floor around it scattered with plaster dust and splinters of glass. On that cot a baby lay crying, not from pain, not from fear, but from the sheer shock of having been ripped from sleep into a world that had just been torn apart. Hagrid reached the scene before the Ministry officials could cordon it off. He had been sent by Dumbledore, who already knew what had happened. Before the news had even begun to spread, the old wizard had felt it. A shift in the magical currents, A sudden silence where there had been a terrible thrumming presence for more than a decade. Voldemort was gone. Not dead, perhaps, but broken, dispersed, stripped of form and power. And in his place, a child had become the living anchor of something the wizarding world had not seen in centuries. A protection born of ancient magic, a sacrifice willingly given and received. Hagrid's boots crunched through the debris as he climbed the stairs. He was not a subtle man, nor a quiet one, but that night he moved with a gentleness that surprised even himself. He found Harry lying in the cot, the scarlet lightning bolt cut on his forehead still fresh, the blood already drying into a thin, dark line. The baby's eyes were open, and they were green, the same green as his mother's. Hagrid had known Lily Evans when she was a girl at Hogwarts, had seen her laugh in the Great Hall, had watched her grow into a witch of extraordinary courage. And now she was gone, her body lying at the foot of the cot, her arms still outstretched, as if she had tried to shield her son with nothing but her own flesh. Hagrid lifted Harry carefully, wrapping him in a blanket that had somehow survived the blast. The baby stopped crying almost immediately, as if he recognised that he was now in safe hands, and Hagrid, who had faced dragons and giants and the darkest creatures of the forest, felt his own eyes sting with tears. He carried Harry down the stairs, past the wreckage of the front door, out into the cool October night. The street was quiet, too quiet, as if the whole world was holding its breath. But the world was not holding its breath for long. By dawn, the news had spread through every corner of magical Britain, from the dusty shelves of Flourish and Blot to the deepest vaults of Gringotts. Voldemort was defeated, the Dark Lord who had terrorized the wizarding world for over a decade, who had murdered without mercy, who had built an army of Death Eaters out of fear and ambition. He had fallen, not to an army, not to a legendary duel, but to a baby, a child who had been marked as his equal by prophecy and who had survived the killing curse that had never failed before. The celebration began as a whisper in the pubs of Diagon Alley, then swelled into a roar that echoed through the leaky cauldron and out into the streets. Fireworks exploded over the rooftops, colours bleeding into the grey dawn sky. Strangers embraced in the streets. Witches and wizards who had hidden for years emerged from their homes, their faces tear-streaked and disbelieving. The Ministry of Magic, which had been a fortress of fear and paranoia, suddenly became a place of jubilant chaos. Aurors who had spent sleepless nights hunting. Death Eaters found themselves laughing, crying, drinking toast to the boy who had done what no one else could. And yet, even in the midst of that joy, there was a strange hollow note, because everyone knew that this victory had come at a terrible cost. James and Lily Potter were dead. Their bodies would be found, their funerals held in the quiet of Godric's Hollow, their names carved into stone, alongside so many others who had fallen in the war. And the boy who had saved them all, the boy who had become a symbol of hope, was an orphan. He had no parents to hold him, no family to welcome him home. He had only a half-giant who carried him through the night, and a wizard in a tall hat who had already decided where the child must go. Dumbledore met Hagrid at the edge of the village, standing beneath a street lamp that cast a pale circle of light onto the cobblestones. He did not speak at first. He simply looked at Harry, at the mark on his forehead, and then at the distant glow of the ruined house. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, as if he were discussing a minor administrative detail rather than the fate of a child. "You know what we must do, Hagrid." Hagrid nodded, though his heart was heavy. He had hoped, foolishly, perhaps, that Harry would be raised among wizards, that he would grow up knowing the truth of what he had done, that he would be celebrated as the hero he was. But Dumbledore had explained it already, in that quiet, persuasive way of his. The boy needed to be protected. The Death Eaters were scattered, but they were not gone. Voldemort's followers would seek revenge, would hunt the child who had destroyed their master. And there was the deeper magic to consider, the ancient protection that Lily's sacrifice had woven around her son. That protection could only survive if Harry remained with blood relatives, with the one family that shared his mother's blood. And so they took him to number 4, Privet Drive. The street was silent in the early hours of November 1st. The houses were dark, the gardens tidy, the pavement swept clean of autumn leaves. It was a perfectly ordinary Muggle neighbourhood, the kind of place where nothing extraordinary had ever happened, and nothing extraordinary ever would. Hagrid set Harry down on the doorstep, his enormous hands trembling as he placed the basket, a simple wicker basket, lined with blankets, onto the cold stone. The baby stirred, whimpered once, and then fell still. Dumbledore withdrew a letter from his robes, folded neatly and sealed with a crest that had not been seen in public for years. He tucked it into the folds of the blanket, just beside Harry's cheek. Then he straightened, and for a long moment he stood looking down at the child. His blue eyes, usually so bright and piercing, seemed dimmed by something that might have been grief, or might have been regret. He did not speak. He simply raised his wand, and the street lamp above them flickered, casting the doorstep into shadow. Hagrid wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Goodbye, Harry," he whispered, his voice cracking, and then he followed Dumbledore into the darkness, his massive frame disappearing around the corner, leaving only the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. The basket sat on the doorstep as the sky began to lighten. A milk truck rumbled past, a cat stretched in a front garden, and somewhere in the house behind the door, a woman named Petunia Dursley was waking up to a morning that would change her life forever. She did not know, as she shuffled toward the kitchen in her slippers and dressing gown, that her nephew was waiting for her. She did not know that the boy she had tried so hard to forget, the boy her sister had loved, the boy who carried the weight of an entire world on his small shoulders, was lying in a basket on her welcome mat. But she would find out soon enough. And when she opened that door, when she saw the blanket and the letter and the scar that had already become the most famous mark in the wizarding world, she would slam it again. She would shake. She would argue with her husband. She would try, for a few desperate minutes, to pretend that this was not happening. But it was happening. And Harry Potter, the boy who lived, was about to be raised in a world of perfectly trimmed hedges and overcooked roasts and cupboards under the stairs, a world that knew nothing of magic, nothing of prophecy, nothing of the ancient bloodlines and dark horrors that had shaped his first hours of life. He would grow up as ordinary as the Dursleys could make him, ignorant of his own power, unaware of the legacy that clung to him like a second skin. And yet that legacy was already written. The ancient magic that had saved him was not finished. The prophecy that had marked him was not fulfilled. The wizarding world had celebrated too soon, because while Voldemort had fallen, he had not fallen forever. He was out there, somewhere clinging to existence by the thinnest of threads, plotting his return. And Harry, asleep on that doorstep, would one day have to face him again. But that was a story for another time. For now, the sun rose over Privet Drive, and the world believed that the darkness had finally ended. The whispers of celebration faded into the everyday hum of a quiet suburban morning, and a baby, alone in his basket, opened his green eyes to the light. The first chapter of his life had closed before it had even truly begun, and the next would not open for another 10 years. But when it did, the wizarding world would learn that the boy who lived was not just a symbol of what had been, but a promise of what was yet to come. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter